Hey guys, tonight we slip under a low-hide roof while the stars are still stubborn and you feel the floor of packed earth pressing its cool opinion into your shoulder. Smoke from last night's fire hangs like a wool scarf, and your first breath tastes of ash-damp leather and the faint sweetness of dried berries tucked in a pouch by your head. You are not a museum visitor here. You are the one whose toes search for the warm side of a burnt log, whose hair smells like the hearth, whose dream ends the moment a thrush starts rehearsing dawn. You probably won't survive this, at least not with all your modern habits intact. But for a few gentle minutes, you can borrow the heartbeat of a very old morning. So before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. Tell me where you're listening from and your local time. I like imagining all the tiny islands of light you make across the world. Now dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You wake at first light because the sky is your clock, and the clock is bossy. The bed is a patchwork of tanned hides and woven grasses, softened by years of bodies and stories. Some nights, you sleep right on the ground, because the ground knows your shape and charges the lowest rent. You turn your face toward the coals still alive under their grey blanket, and you feed them with breath. First, careful, patient puffs, then with 2 twigs and a small curl of resinous wood. Fire is the roommate you never ignore. It keeps you warm, keeps predators thoughtful, and keeps your band from spending every hour hungry. You pull a fur across your shoulders and sit up slow every joint, narrating the night in small pops. The air tastes colder out from under the hide, but it's a polite cold that retreats when the flames remember how to be orange. Around you other sleepers stir, a cousin rolls toward the heat. A child swaddled in a rabbit skin wrap opens a fist like a tiny sunrise. An elder mutters a dream, then laughs, then stops. You shift to the cave mouth, or to the mouth of your lean-to, if this part of the year likes open ground better, and read the light on the trees. Birds are already scheduling meetings. Somewhere far off, a river talks to stones. Closer, a fox considers your lack of breakfast and reconsiders your surplus of numbers. You grin. The fox has met your watchfires before. You brush grit from your knees with a handful of dry grass, then do the same for the sleeping mat that's about to be rolled and tied. Your tools wait where you left them, within reach of warmth, and wary of wandering feet, a flake of flint sharper than gossip, a hand axe smoothed to the curve of your palm, a bone awl, a woven cord that remembers not lessons taught beside many fires. The sharp things get checked first. A dull edge is just a pretty rock. You press your thumb to the flake, feel the insulted sting, and smile because this tiny bite is good news. In the old world, a sharp edge is a second heartbeat. You drink the last of last night's water from a skin that tastes like goat and patience. Mainstream fact for your inner nerd. Most upper Paleolithic groups probably live in bands of roughly 20 to 30 people, fluid membership, flexible roles, and a travel calendar tuned to seasons, game migrations, and plant ripening. No one here has a calendar app, but everyone has one in their bones. The band's elders wake slow. The nimblest adolescents volunteer for kindling. You step outside the circle and scan the ground for tracks made while you were a dream-born dear human who isn't us. The soil holds every footstep like it's trying to remember names. You read what it offers and leave the rest to morning. Joke one edges in, because even the Stone Age needs sarcasm. Your smartwatch is a big bright thing in the East called the sun. And yes, its battery life is ridiculous. You hoist your hide cloak closer to your chin and realize you slept so near the fire, your hair smells like roasted pine. Somewhere in the future, a perfumer will try to recreate this as hearth musk and absolutely fail. You listen the way you've been taught, ears measuring distance, nose passing, freshness, skin feeling the temperature of wind and warning. You are not trying to be heroic. You are trying to be ordinary, in a time where ordinary is already expert. Historians still argue whether people in the deep past kept a strict night watch or practiced segmented sleep, 2 shorter sleeps, with a quiet fire-tending interval between. But you know this: someone always wakes when a log rolls, and someone always dreams with one ear open. Tonight it was you. Dawn makes you the first to stretch. You poke the coals again, feed them a stick as thin as a promise, and imagine the first mouthfuls of the day. Bitter roots sliced thin, a handful of berries, if they're still cheating the frost. Maybe a beetle or a snail if your stomach places a rush order. You wipe your fingers on a leaf, not because they're dirty, they are always honest, but because the leaf is there and its cool wet feels like a little lesson in being awake. The camp rises in a slow ripple. A pair of teenagers' quiet, rivals' cordial hands collect ember bark and twist it into a carryable glow, because moving fire safely is a craft with stakes you can feel. A grandmother hums and lays out strips of hide to dry in the thin sun. Her hands have been telling leather what to do since before you were clever. You shake out a sleeping pelt and hook it on a forked stick to catch smoke, because smoke chases insects like a grumpy aunt. The space that was a bedroom is now a room for feet, for bundles, for jokes. On good mornings, a creek is nearby and unfrozen, and you stroll there with a friend who knows how to walk light and talk lighter. Hygiene isn't an aesthetic project, it's functional triage. If the stream welcomes you, you splash your face, rinse, grit from wrists, and let the cold argue your eyelids into wakefulness. If the water bites instead of talks, you take a handful of clean leaves, wipe away yesterday's ash and travel and call it washed with a straight face. You brush your teeth with a twig and wood ash, not because a dentist wrote you a note, but because ash is a mild abrasive that polishes away yesterday's stubbornness. Quirky tidbit ethnographers note that many forager groups use chewed twigs as toothbrushes, and char or ash shows up in ancient mouths as a handy if crunchy hygienic friend. Your mint toothpaste is at least 30,000 years in the future, and it will still complain about your flossing. You coil the cord that ties your hair away from sparks, and accept a smear of ochre on your cheek from the child who believes everyone looks better decorated. The pigment smells like iron and riverbeds. It's not makeup in our modern sense, it's a habit that marks belonging, repels insects a bit, and keeps skin from feeling naked in the bright. Historians still argue whether ochre use in the Paleolithic was chiefly symbolic, practical, or both. You answer the debate with a nod and a better mood. Either way, the red stain on your thumb will outlast this morning's worries. Breakfast is a scavenger's poem composed on the fly. When last night's snares are kind, you roast a small rabbit or a clutch of field mice, sliding them on green twigs and turning them near the coals until the steam smells like permission. When the snares shrug, you pivot to plants, corms you tripped from mud yesterday and tucked into embers. To soften nuts, you crack with a practiced wrist twist against a flat stone. Berries that haven't lied about the season. You learn quickly that a stomach is an excellent philosopher, always arguing, rarely wrong. Joke 2 arrives with the first roasted grub. You pop it like a protein-filled marshmallow and announce deadpan that it has notes of forest with a finish of please don't make me share. Your tools sit close. Keeping edges keen is your version of checking messages, and the conversation matters more. You strike flint against a chunk of iron-rich stone, spitting sparks like opinions, and nurse a tinder nest until it decides to be flame. You pressure flake the hand axe's edge, chipping tiny half-moons from the margin so the line gets meaner and your day gets safer. Mainstream fact, the toolkits evolve over very long spans, simple. Oldowan-style flakes become Acheulean hand axes, and by the Middle Paleolithic, the Levallois technique appears where cores are prepped to strike predictably shaped flakes. Much later, specialized blades and microliths stack into compound tools that would make your present thumb feel proud. For now, your edge is good, and good is enough. Someone coughs, you glance over. The cough is not dramatic. It's the kind that tells you who slept too far from warmth. You toss that cousin a warmed hide and a joke about trading coughs for extra berries, no shame, just barter. You bank this observation for later tonight, sit him nearer the heat. Survival is a group project graded daily. You step to the margin of light and track the first errands. Over there, a set of cloven prints where a red deer moved like it owned the hill. Here, the neat triangle of a fox's passage. There, the scuff of human feet that do not belong to your band. You let your knees bend a little more, the way hunters taught you when you were shorter and louder, and your eyes retune. The hill talks in pale green nouns, lichen moss, new shoots, and your stomach notes every adjective. You cut a sprig of wild mint, rub it on your fingers just for the joy of smelling like a stream, and tuck the rest into the cook fire to make the smoke polite. The sun climbs and the day clarifies into tasks. One set of hands fetches water in animal bladders and gourds. Another set stacks dry wood under the ledge. A third reties the shelter walls where a wind found a gossip hole. Children are given jobs with edges dulled. Collect these small sticks, shoo the curious crow. Don't pet the hedgehog unless the hedgehog votes. Yes, your role is a simple sacred errand. Keep the fire fed and the tools honest while scouts check near meadows. You move through the little responsibilities like beads on a cord, One, then the next, never tugging hard enough to break the string. As mid-morning settles, you indulge in a very old luxury stories while you work. An elder sets a bone flute on her lap, eyes half closed, and will later pull from it a thin, clear ribbon of sound that makes even the baby stare. She's not performing for applause, she's tracing memory onto air. The music smells like smoke and laughter, and something your language calls belonging. You promise yourself you'll borrow that song tonight when the dark asks for a reason to be patient. You feel the day align, fire breathing, well, stomach faintly content, band awake and cooperative, weather undecided but negotiable. You let your spine unknot a fraction and accept that this is what normal feels like right now. Work. You can hold people, you can trust, and a small circle of warmth that keeps the forest polite. By late morning, the light is crisp on bark, and your shadow finally admits it knows your name. The camp's sleeping gear is lashed and stowed, freeing the earth for new footsteps. You tend ashes the way a librarian tends shelves, stir flatten, save what matters. White ash gets scooped into a hide pouch for later soapish duties. Charcoal goes aside for drawing lines on stone when a child asks how big was the fish, and you answer bigger than a story allows. You tip the kettle stone from the edge of the coals. Steam sighs out, and a few bitter leaves turn hot water into something like advice. The morning's first real decision walks in on two legs. A scout returns with a hand lifted in quiet triumph, fresh sign of wild pig, acorn fatter than last week, moving toward the marsh. The band's choices sort themselves by experience and mood. A small hunting party will try a stalk this afternoon. Gatherers will move in the opposite arc to keep the larder from despairing if the pigs refuse generosity. You practical today stay with the fire crew and the children repairing shelter, sharpening teaching. Historians still argue whether work roles in the Paleolithic were strictly gendered or simply pragmatic. Whoever is strongest, freest, or most skilled does the thing that needs doing. Your camp leans pragmatic because rent is due in calories and attention. Lunch, such as it is not breakfast anymore. You mash roasted roots into a smoky mash with the flat of your hand axe, sprinkle in crushed nuts, and eat with a focus modern diners would call reverence. Joke 3 sidles up. You announce that your dish is locally sourced, seasonally appropriate, and plated on a leaf because we're sustainable influencers. No one knows what you're talking about, and yet everyone laughs. The afternoon is domestic courage. You relace the hide wall where rain snuck through last time. You braid new cordage from nettle stems, fingers remembering a rhythm that turns sting into strength. You fix a small tear in your cloak with bone needle and clean sinew, marveling again that a hole can become a line and a line can become a garment. A toddler, he of the rabbit skin swaddle, toddles toward the hearth with the curiosity of a comet. You redirect gently, give him a smooth stone to befriend, and tell a 2-sentence story about a clever heron who learned where fish nap. He nods like he will retell it later with better pacing. Mainstream fact to pin to this quiet, controlled use of fire in deep prehistory predates your particular morning by hundreds of thousands of years, and by the Upper Paleolithic, it is a mastered companion, light heat, cooked food, social center, predator, deterrent. Many hearths are discovered with rings of stone and patterned ash that show a choreography of sitters, not unlike the one you're living right now. The hearth is a room even when there are no walls. The afternoon lengthens, and with it the distance to danger. Shelter, small as it is, holds. The forest goes on rehearsing its million-leafed opera. You check edges again, a spear point rehafted tight, an old wound on your palm re-greased with animal fat, a cord retied because it was smug. Your eyes stray to the horizon where the hunters disappeared, then back to the tasks in your lap. Hope is allowed, reliance is reserved. You keep your hands moving because busy hands are both blanket and prayer. Quirky tidbit glints from the work pile. A string of drilled shells hangs from a peg beads, gathered far from here, traded across unknown faces, then carried like a song from camp to camp until they landed by your hearth. They clack softly when the breeze argues with your wall. Maybe they're status, maybe they're love, maybe they're just the joy of turning a small, hard thing into a bright sound. You finger them while you wait for the kettle to mutter again and imagine a shoreline where someone bent for hours to make the holes and call it beautiful. The past talks to itself in ornaments. Afternoon tends to one more teachable moment. You take a child to the slope where clay stays damp and show how to press a palm and feel the earth keep it another kind of handprint, not the famous cave kind yet, but a practice in I was here. The child squeals, then presses again, making a row of tiny signatures that sunlight will erase by next rain. The lesson has two morals. Everything changes and make your mark anyway. As shadows begin to stretch like lazy cats, the hunting party returns. Sometimes they carry meat and the story is simple. Feast, fat, smoke, a song for the animal. Today they carry a different story. The pigs were clever, the marsh was moodier than memory, and everyone values their ankles enough to try again tomorrow. There's no shame, there's stew. Gatherers return with a basket, bright with greens and roots, a bouquet of mushrooms approved by the elder with the encyclopedia eyes, and two fistfuls of tiny freshwater mussels from a hiding place a child found by accident and called treasure rocks. Dinner adds itself together because cooperation is cuisine. Before dusk, you repair the fire circle stones, firm ash raked safe, and you spread the hides again in a careful flour around heat. Someone tells a story you love, how the big cat who owned this valley once tried to steal the sun, how a grandmother tricked him with a mirror pool, how the sun laughed and stayed. It's a good story because it explains why rivers remember faces and why grandmothers should be obeyed. The bone flute returns thin and brave, and the child with the clay prints hums along in a key discovered that very second. Here near night, your ordinary life feels astonishingly full. You have chores that make sense, companions who make jokes, skills that turn wildness into dinner, and a fire that forgives every wind. You settle onto your hide with the comforting weight of a tired body that did exactly enough. The cave mouth glows softly like a lantern. The lean-to's smoke finds the hole you left for it and chooses the sky. Someone tosses a final handful of mint on the coals, and the gods of breath decide to be kind. One last look outward. The trees are silhouettes, the river a darker silk, the stars arriving in their usual arrogant numbers. Would you survive this? You whisper to yourself, and the night answers in smells and warmth, and the quiet consensus of your band. Survival here is not a headline, it's a rhythm. You tuck your feet close to the bright roll onto a hip your ancestors also trusted, and let your eyes close on a present tense older than any city. You duck to the stream again at grey light, because the rule is simple: water first, courage second, and only in that order, when the ice is honest enough to float instead of bite. You carry a gourd that still smells faintly of last summer's sun, and a slung hide filled with yesterday's melt. You test the surface with a stick. No heroics, just policy, and rinse your face until your skin remembers it belongs to you. Hygiene for you is not a spa day. It's function, it's triage, it's keeping the parts that move from sticking and the parts that heal from arguing. If the bank is treacherous or the current unreadable, you revert to the backup plan your elders taught you. A handful of green leaves becomes a traveler's washcloth, sweeping ash and grit from wrist's neck, and the soft hollows where sweat tells secrets. You chew the end of a small twig until it blossoms into fibers. Dip it in clean ash from the hearth and scrub your teeth gently. The taste is campfire and honesty, and your tongue will appreciate not being a museum of last night's stew. Back near the fire, you share a small etiquette with the smoke bend toward it, to let it drive away midges, then step aside before your eyes complain. The babies stay tucked inside warm wraps of hair and fox faces peeking like moons. Their mothers lift them out only when the sun says it's allowed. You rub a thumb of animal fat into the cracks on your knuckles to remind your hands they are tools too. A smear of ochre across the bridge of the nose is not theatre. Out here, that iron earth helps against the pale, sharp light and makes the skin less tasty to insects. Historians still argue whether ochre in the deep past is mainly symbolic status and story or partly medicinal and protective. You settle the debate the practical way by noticing fewer bites and a better mood. You learned early that cleanliness is a moving target dictated by weather and water's attitude. On warm days, you wade, scoop, splash, and laugh like a seal. On cruel days, you wash with steam, head bent over a hot stone, wet with a little river water towel of hide held close to trap the fugitive warmth. Mainstream fact. You can whisper to your modern self, dental plaque from ancient jaws, stores, micro reminders, char starches, pollen grains that tell scholars you didn't eat like a cartoon caveman and you certainly lived in smoke. That smoke would have sterilized some pests and irritated others, and your camp used it as a tool as much as a nuisance. You change into the driest wrap comb burrs out of your hair with a bone pick and grin when a small cousin presents a brush made of twigs bound with sinew. You try it because children are excellent inventors when vanity costs nothing. Clothing is an argument you have mostly won with winter. You know which seams need double stitching and which part of the hide likes to live at the shoulder. where rain falls off in a forgiving curve. Your cloak's edges are burnished with fat to shed sleet. Your leggings are laced high to evict opportunistic snow. You tie your hair with a cord of twisted nettle soft, now that days of rolling have told the plant to behave. There are no mirrors, so tidiness is measured by feel. If a seam doesn't scratch, and a braid doesn't snag, and your toes can wiggle, you look excellent. Quirky tidbit: you sometimes dust tender skin with crushed fragrant leaves. Wild mint when you're lucky, crushed pine when you're practical, not perfume in the modern sense, so much as a traveling truce with your own nose. The stream decides to be your ally a little longer, so you take advantage and rinse the hearth pot, a rounded stone basin you coaxed from a river 2 camps ago, using sand as a gentle scourer, rolling grit under your palm until the inside shines with a satiny dark. Historians still argue whether people in cold latitudes bathed routinely or simply rotated wipe-downs, smoke and seasonal plunges. The archaeological record has more hearths than bathtubs, and sensible people don't break ice just to look glossy. Your standard is simple, clean enough to heal, warm enough to work, dry enough to sleep, without earning a cough shaped like regret. You keep your jokes small and warm this time of morning. Joke 1 arrives when you spot a teenager trying to catch his reflection in a puddle to fix his hair. You announce solemnly that Fashion Week has been postponed due to mammoth weather, but he's free to headline mud season. He rolls his eyes, then asks you to retie the thong on his spear. It's the kind of grooming that actually matters. By the time the sun is a believable rumor, and the frost has stopped, pretending it owns your footprints, you feel capable of the day. You've washed enough, you've smoked enough, you've remembered your edges and reassured your skin. You pack away the washing leaves to be burned later, so they don't try to rot where you sleep, and toss a pinch of mint into the coals just because the smell changes the room in your head. You look down at your nails black with yesterday's coal and earth and smile. Cleanliness here means I won't infect the cut. I won't stick to my own clothes. I can eat with these hands and not get yelled at by an elder. It's a good definition. It's survivable. Breakfast, if we can flatter it with that modern word, is a negotiation with season luck and whatever you cached under a flat stone last dusk. You pry up your larder rock, no little paws have stolen your stash, and bring out a humble feast, roasted corms the color of dusk, a fist of hazelnuts, a strip of dried meat. And if you want to flex 2 fat grubs plucked from beneath a log and toasted until they pop like practical popcorn, you crack nuts with your travel anvil, also known as a rock, you like very much, and you share, because hoarding is an excellent way to be teased all winter. You hand the child the first sweet kernel of roasted root and watch eyes go wide. Calories and affection are the same gift in the morning. You sit with your tools while you chew because eating and sharpening are the twins of survival. The flint core in your lap is already prepped for the good stuff. You run a special sequence of strikes pressure where the platform is weakest, a clean follow-through with an antler tine, and pop a flake that looks like the first page of a book you'll actually finish. Mainstream fact that would make your future engineering teacher beam: the Levallois technique, that fancy core prep you just did, shows up in the Middle Paleolithic and spreads widely, producing predictable sharp flakes. Later people stretch blades longer and narrower, eventually setting microliths, tiny razor chips, into wood or bone to make composite tools with more cutting edge than any one stone could provide. You're not naming it. You're doing it because names come late and hunger arrives on time. You fit a new flake into a wooden handle to make a fast knife, binding it with wet rawhide that will shrink and grip like a promise as it dries. Then you brew glue because, yes, even this far back, you do adhesives by heating a strip of birch bark in a low oxygen nest of embers until it sweats tar, then catching that dark syrup on a flat stone. Quirky tidbit, birch bark tar is one of humanity's oldest glues, and it smells like a campfire remembering its first crush. You smear a little on the haft-press bind again and grin at a tool that will behave even when your fingers go numb. The fire does more than warm and threaten predators. It cooks your future into better shape. You toss corms into embers because carbohydrates are kinder to the gut when their starches unwind in heat. You roast meat because warmth and smoke collaborate to disarm invisible enemies you can't name but have learned to respect. Mainstream fact-controlled cooking goes back at least a few 100,000 years, and the nutritional boost, softer fibers, more accessible calories, lets bodies spend fewer hours chewing and more hours doing all the other things you do so well: making, teaching, playing, planning. You joke that your cuisine is ember forward with charcoal notes, and the elder who laughs hardest also gets the second grub. Once you're fed, your mind sharpens alongside your tools. You prepare a small pile of spear points with delicate retouching that would embarrass any future manicure, tiny rhythmic chips to even the edge. You test each with the back of a nail and with the quiet, respectful press against a strip of hide. The hand axe gets a fresh kiss of the antler. The scraper's hook is tuned to peel down hide without catching. Your tool roll, if a rolled hide with pockets counts, now holds the basics of not dying. Flake knife, scraper, all hand axe. A bundle of straightened shafts and a loop of sinew that will be thread as soon as your fingers say, now. You add bone and antler to stone because you're not a snob about materials. That deer met your camp 3 winters ago and is still paying rent. A sliver of rib becomes a needle with a drilled eye. A shard of leg bone becomes a smooth, tireless awl for piercing leather. A tine of antler becomes the deluxe pressure flaker that makes stone do ballet. Later, when you have hours by the fire, ivory, if you can trade for it, will allow little miracles, buttons, toggles, hooks. Historians still argue whether the burst of specialized tools in the late Paleolithic reflects a cognitive leap, population pressure, or simply the accumulation of good ideas. You're too busy threading sinew through a bone eye to moderate that panel. In your world, a sharp edge is a mother tongue. Mid-morning slides in, and the foragers divide like a river through rocks, 2 toward the patch where bitter roots hide, 1 toward the berry thicket that sometimes lies kindly before birds do a pair to stroll the deadfall line for fresh mushrooms after rain. You check the snares you set with yesterday's patience, a noose of twisted fiber here, a carefully brushed trail there. Sometimes they're kind. Today one holds a rabbit that never learned your handwriting. You thank it words, soft hands firm, and carry it back with modest ceremony. The child watches and you do this clean, fast and quiet because skill is inheritance and respect is part of the meal. Joke 2 hops in. When you show a teen how to set a new snare, you declare him vice president of snacks. And he tries not to smile, like a person receiving a promotion in a company where everyone pays in berries. He copies your knots and then invents a tiny improvement in how the trigger twig rests. You praise the tweak because innovation deserves applause even when it's made of sticks and 10 minutes. The hunters before they leave borrow heat to straighten shafts, rolling green wood gently over coals until the fibers agree to be true. They check fletching on light javelins, spin cords and tie stone to wood, with a combination of sinew, tar and stubbornness. The band's philosophy of equipment is consistent. Everything is a draft. Everything can be tuned. Everything you carry should solve 3 problems, or it's just a pretty burden. You run a final thumb along a knife's edge and hand it to the person who drops edges fastest, you, the one who's going to keep working near the hearth all afternoon. The edge answers with that faint, thrilling whisper, known universally as ready. Before the hunters vanish into trees, you trade them a superstition dressed as science, a sprig of mint to crush and sniff if their minds get noisy, a reminder to keep wind on their face so their scent trails behind, and a small shared joke about not bringing home boar as an apology for getting lost. They grin because you all know hunting victory is seasonal and hunting failure is a teacher you don't mock. Then they're gone, becoming shadows that carry your dinner's chances. You return to the business of not wasting anything, bones that will become tools, fat that will become balm, and hours that will become skill. Your day this stretch between breakfast and whatever the afternoon invents is also a master class in containers and shelters, the 2 quiet technologies that turn survive into live. Water travels in what the landscape offers, cured bladders tied with neat knots, large leaves folded into instant cups, gourds hollowed and dried until they ring when you flick them. For hauling bundles, you weave grass and pliant twigs into baskets. The first ones wobble like fawns. The 100th sits square and proud. Mainstream fact even before fired pottery becomes common, and some of the oldest known pots really do go back around 20,000 years. In parts of East Asia, people used gourds, bark, woven fiber and stomachs as vessels. In some places, pitch-lined baskets held boiling stones to cook stews without a single clay shard. You try the old trick now. Heat round river stones in the coals. Plop them one by one into a skin bag of water with roots and meat. Listen to the sizzle. Sing and rotate stones before anyone gets ideas about burning through. Your clothing improves as your hands learn to speak hide and fiber fluently. Scraped clean on the convex scraper, stretched, smoked, softened with long, patient kneading leather, becomes your second weather. Sinew becomes thread that remembers to shrink tight and hold seams shut against wind. You punch holes with that bone all-stitch, with that bone needle, and tie toggles carved from antler that your fingers can find even when your eyes are dealing with snow. Quirky tidbit: somewhere out on these plains, a person is threading a tiny bone needle barely thicker than a thorn. And if you could time travel one object into your century's sewing kit, that needle would swagger among stainless steel like a celebrity aunt. When your band needs walls, you do not stand around waiting for caves to volunteer. You build. On sea-bright coasts, some people stake whale ribs and drape hides into hoops of winter courage. In river valleys, you bend saplings into domes and thatch with reed and grass until rain learns to slide off instead of bully through. Further east, much later, folks will raise mammoth bone frames and stack tusks into rings, then thatch with vide, the ultimate recycling project. Mainstream fact: to steady your mental map, sites like Terra Amata in modern-day France preserve traces of huts, oval footprints of post holes and hearths, while Ukrainian sites preserve mammoth bone houses from around 15,000 years ago. Whatever the latitude, people reconfigure the materials at hand into inside. Your camp today is modest windbreak of poles and hides roof, low to trap warmth, smoke hole arranged like a polite argument with the weather. It works. The shelter you've mended becomes the classroom for 3 simultaneous lessons. A child practices weaving by looping grass over a stick and pretending it's a basket for frog-sized groceries. An elder inspects the roof seam you fixed and nods a small approving nod that you'll treasure for days. You, without announcing it, count the gaps where daylight pokes through and decide which can stay and which must be convinced otherwise. This is maintenance, as ritual, quiet, repetitive, holy by practice. Historians still argue whether the rhythm of Paleolithic domestic life, repair, cook, teach, gets too little credit because archaeology loves tools and bones more than brooms and jokes. Your day votes for brooms and jokes. Lunch is a handful and a sip. You shell nuts with a stone you will cry over if anyone loses it. You peel the cooked corms, mash them with a splash from the boiling bag, and call it stew. You pass your gourd and don't count swallows because trust is measured in liquids here. You wear your cloak open to let steam escape and keep smoke working the bugs. In the doorway, the string of shells clicks in a mild breeze. Across the way, a cousin with a baby uses a bone scraper to clean a winter pelt in long, obliging strokes. No one says productivity. Everyone says nearly there, 2 more hands, nice edge. Your group is roughly 24 souls this month. People slip in and out like weather joining for a season, moving along when roads, kin, or guts insist. Mainstream fact bands of 20 to 30 are a reasonable guess across many foragers, big enough to share risk, and stories small enough to move when the landscape changes its mind. The band breathes, hunters exhale, gatherers inhale, elders keep the lungs from arguing. Trade is a conversation you carry on the move, flint for shells, gossip for roots, a coil of sinew for a tune you haven't heard yet. At night, if someone stumbles in from another fire with a pouch of different smell, you widen the circle and pass the pot. Feasting is weather in your calendar. It sweeps through it, rearranges it, leaves a better smelling memory. In the distance, you see a low line of smoke and think about landscape as a partner. You've watched elders burn small patches when the wind is disciplined and the ground is ready, calling in fresh green that animals crave, calling away ticks and snakes that forgot how to share. Historians still argue how widespread such fire management was in the deep past, but one mainstream example hums under your breath. Aboriginal Australians have used careful burning for tens of thousands of years to shape country into a mosaic of food and safety, and the idea rhymes with what your own elders do when they declare a patch good for new. Your hands understand the wisdom even if your vocabulary is smoke and gesture. Afternoon narrows into the long hour of patience. You retouch a point that refused perfection earlier, and it suddenly cooperates like a child who needed a nap and a snack before math. The boiling bag has become soup. You drop in a few hot stones to keep it honest, using tongs of green wood so you don't brand your palms. Joke 3 arrives as you tap a stone dry on a flat rock. Congratulations, you've reinvented the dishwasher soak heat sigh. An elder chuckles, which is the local equivalent of a 5-star review. The hunters appear as shadows first, then as people with shoulders telling the story before mouths do. Today's verdict is mixed, no pig, but a deer spooked. One hare, a brace of birds, foolish enough to wager on your cousin's patience. A bundle of tubers stolen from a boar's plough. No triumph chance tonight, but no despair either. You set the pot wider and slice your share thinner. Hunger is a tide. You ride it together or not at all. Evening will bring music if the wind behaves. The bone flute is already out, and a drum stretched hide over a ring of willow waits its turn. The first notes are thin, then become a ribbon that knots your band into one story. A child claps a rhythm that nobody taught and everybody recognizes. Your shelter gathers the sound and lends it a wooden halo. On the wall, someone has traced a hand with charcoal. Just a line, just a claim, just the proof of a day that asked and a person who answered. Historians still argue whether such marks are signatures, magic teaching aids, or all of the above. You press your own fingers to that outline, almost matching, and smile at the continuity of palms. As darkness settles, your chores soften. Embers banked, boiling water, set aside in a skin for later tools, wrapped in hide and tucked near your sleeping place where damp can't flirt with them. You hang the gourd where mice can dream, but not chew. You sweep the floor with a bundle of grass not to erase the day it's in your skin, and your clothes and your grin, but to keep tomorrow from tripping. You pull your cloak around your shoulders and feel the neat seam you stitched at midday sit quietly against your neck doing its job. The roof creaks a friendly creak. The fire shrinks to a night-sized sun. Would you survive this part of the day, you ask yourself, as you stretch on hides that were chores a week ago and are now furniture? The answer hums from the soup, from the rafters, from the flute, from your cleaned nails and tuned edges, yes, because survival here is built of very small, very repeatable moves, done kindly with attention. You close your eyes with that sentence on your tongue. Tomorrow you'll make it again. You move out with the hunters because today your legs feel springy and the air smells like a chance, not a test. You keep wind on your face shade at your back and your eyes on the grammar of the ground print. Scuff snapped grass, a bead of dung still glossy because the earth writes what animals won't tell you to your face. When you find a slot of tracks heading up slope, you don't announce it like a hero. You tilt your chin and the others read that small tilt as a full sentence. Success in this world is an ensemble performance. You might lose the point. But 5 bodies kept the rhythm, and failure is the day's stern teacher who sends you to the forager's tent for extra credit. You and a cousin kneel at a track where dew still collects in the toe press. You measure freshness with a fingertip and pass the answer with your eyebrows. The quarry is young, red deer, light, quick, nervous about everything, with teeth. Congratulations, you qualify. You ghost forward in a staggered line, each person covering what the others can't see, the way a hand spreads to reach more berries. The points you carry are a small choir in your fist, 2 broad heads for a close rush, 1 thinner scandalously sharp for a last-second gift of distance. You grip light, but you grip sure. Throwing and thrusting both feel like languages you've practiced since dawn became a thing. Mainstream fact to tuck under your belt with the knife. People were doing this long before metal swaggered onto the stage. Wooden thrusting spears from Schöningen in Germany, straight as a ruler balanced for killing, are about 300,000 years old. Later in the Upper Paleolithic, folks add spear throwers atlatls that turn your arm into leverage and your dart into a little rocket with opinions. You've never seen a calendar, but your body knows this timeline first close and dangerous. Later, still dangerous, but with more air between you and the hooves. The deer crest a ridge and the wind chickens out swinging, eddying, messing with your plan. So you call an audible the way your band always does. Drift left and push them towards the notch where stones make clumsy footing. You don't say strategy meeting, you tug your ear, and the oldest hunter nods like yes, we have all spoken. You eye the notch and picture the moves the way a carver pictures flakes before they fly. If it works, meat and fat and marrow sing at supper. If it doesn't, you rebrand today as field research and try not to let your ribs sound like a drum. Joke one floats in the mind because you need the release. When you spot a smear of hair on a thorn, you whisper the deer updated their location status, feeling anxious, moving north, and your cousin smothers a grin without letting his shoulders shake. Humor is not a luxury item out here. It's a grip on the rock when the slope tilts. The stalk stretches long and thin. Hours turn into a rope you pay out carefully. You push through juniper. You feel the tick of dry grass along your calves. You mouth a sip from your gourd and let the quiet return to full. The deer drift, then prick up, like the landscape just cleared its throat. A crow coughs a warning. You wish it would keep to itself. You hold your breath, not out of superstition, but because lungs moving are a flag in the wrong kind of wind. The throw happens in a tiny universe. Your hand the dart, the ribs under a brown hide, the old math of distance and drop. Your dart rides the idea beautifully, then reality swerves. The deer takes that clever half step every prey animal knows by birth and your point kisses hair and air, and not the thing you needed. 2 more darts fly, 1 nicks, 1 plants into a root like a very brave sapling. The herd scatters with a sound like skirts and hooves and judgment. You run because you must run, then you stop, because you are honest hands on thighs, smiling like a person who almost solved a riddle with a bad punchline. This is where status shows its teeth. If you let it, victory feeds you and buys you compliments. Failure asks you to admire roots and the people who know where they sleep. Historians still argue whether status in deep forager time was sharp and permanent or soft and situational, whether a good hunter outranked the people who made his points, stitched his boots, and teased his pride back into shape. In your camp, the answer is half policy, half personality. Big kills, win applause for a day. Sharing wins sleep all winter. You circle to recover the missed dart, check the knock, retie the sinew just to feel useful, and aim your feet toward camp. You pass a stand of elder and mark it with a prévost, hope. Berries later or sticks now for whistles to teach children to call birds that won't be fooled anyway. The sun has become honest noon heat, rising in shivers, flies inventing committees. You lower your shoulders, then raise them again, because posture is a stubborn optimist in a world full of gravity. The hill folds you back toward the hearth, where breakfast steam has become lunch pot, and the people who didn't chase deer will tell gentler stories that still end with food. Back at the fire, you re-enter the alternate economy foragers, with hands full of good decisions. Hazelnuts gleam like coin, tubers steam like promises. A line of fish scooped with baskets at the river's elbow flash the good side of patience. A cousin grins and hoists a rabbit from a snare you set yesterday. You get the honor of the clean cut and the quick thanks, and your stomach stops sulking. Victory someone declares, but in lowercase. You accept the lowercase. You are fluent. You settle into the familiar cadence, split nuts, peel roots, cut thin slices of rabbit for the pot. Save the liver for someone who needs iron more than you. The elder who returned early shows a net of knotted cord, a gift of hours and sore thumbs that can pin birds when flushed, or hold fish when they forget to be smarter than you. Mainstream fact, small game and fish nets, lines basket traps and mass drives, herding animals into ravines or corals show up widely in ethnography and leave indirect fingerprints in prehistory. Piles of hair bones, fish scales by hearths, stake holes where fences once turned herd instincts into dinners. Not every meal looks like a hero song, most look like logistics. You stoke the stew, then skim a ladle of fat to rub into 2 bowstrings you've been nursing. Sinew loves grease, and so do your lips. Someone passes a honeycomb the color of late afternoon, and the band becomes suddenly devout. You break bits into bowls, fold them with warm broth, and call it tonic. Dessert, medicine, and bribe all in one. Quirky tidbit in some places today, honey guides those cheeky birds still lead humans to wild hives in exchange for wax and leftovers. Whether your ancestors here had that exact partnership is a different map. But the idea of cross-species collab is so Paleolithic, it might as well carry a stone membership card. While the pot speaks in cheerful organs, you sit with the teen and retouch a point dulled by ambition earlier. She's learned the rhythm, push, lift, rotate, whisper at the stone to be nice, and she glances up only to ask if she may keep this one for her bundle. Yours, you say, and do not pretend it's charity. She will use it well and save you from her hungry mood later. Historians still argue whether the division of labor by sex in the deep past looked like the cartoon men hunt women gather, or like a spectrum where everyone did whatever the day demanded and bodies allowed. Burial finds with hunting kits buried alongside skeletons with hips shaped for childbearing make some scholars lean toward flexibility. Your camp practices flexibility because winter does not grade on stereotypes. You show 2 kids how to set a line of small snares with barely their triggers. They listen, eyes bright with the privilege of doing something dangerous on purpose, and you end with the speech your elder gave you. Check. Often be kind, don't set more than you can honor. They nod and you tuck 1 extra snare into a pocket because experience is a belt you tighten after the lesson. When the stew is ready, you ladle fair, then add unfair to people who chased deer all morning. The band runs on a fuel mix, calories, jokes, and the precise math of reciprocity. A successful hunter earns a portion and a moment of glossy attention, then watches while the bowl turns clockwise, and the story leaves his hands. Your job today is to make sure nobody's bowl looks punished. You add a little more broth to the elder, who gives you new knots, and a sliver of liver to the woman whose milk keeps a small human loud and alive. Joke 2 arrives on schedule when a teenager tries to describe the almost shot. It was this far, he swears, hands like wings, and you interrupt soft. Yes, yes. We all hit the mammoth that was invisible. He blushes, then laughs, then eats 3 more mouthfuls because embarrassment burns calories too. After food, the workshop becomes hospital and school again. You split a long bone with a controlled crack and chase the marrow with a whisper of salt. You feel your mind grow less cranky in real time. Mainstream physiological truth, whether you call it that or not. Pure lean meat for days can make a person miserable, what later travelers will call rabbit starvation. So your people mix fat, marrow-root seeds, and sweetness whenever possible. The band knows that wisdom in the body, not the textbook. You render the extra fat into a little pot with charred stones and pour it into a skin for later a jar of winter optimism. The hunters not occupied with repair go to scout a low ravine where if the wind and gods and geometry play nicely, a small herd might funnel later. You and 2 others go the opposite way, with kids to shake a stand of shrubs for birds, because a stew with 1 more bird in it becomes a story your stomach tells fondly. Nets out, hands up, a practiced rush, a thrum of wings, 2 in the meshes, 1 clean escape that you cheer anyway because beauty deserves applause. The children hold the birds with reverence and a little fear at the sharp feet. And you do the final quick kindness with a thank you under your breath. On the way back, you stop at a clay bank because curiosity is the kind of greed your band approves. You peel a lump, knead it with wet fingers, and form a tiny dish the size of your palm. You know it will crack in a real fire unless you slow dry and baby it. But experiments are how you pay the future. Later cultures will hard fire pots fine enough to brag about. Here and now, you test, fail, test again, and end the day with something that holds berries without leaking into your lap. Not glamorous, but your lap votes yes. By late afternoon, the camp looks like competence set gently on the ground, drying racks with strips of meat, a skin stretched for scraping a repair to the windbreak, halfway done a coil of cordage, thickening like a vine. You tuck tools away because tools left out become tragedies. You set a guard stick with feathers to flutter in the draft so sparks don't flirt with hides. You remind a child to keep the drum off the damp earth unless they want to audition for sad floppy drum. They roll their eyes, they move the drum. The hunters reappear with faces that answer before their mouths do not today. You shrug at them with affection, push bowls into their hands before they apologize, and redirect the conversation to the net's success and the rabbit's cameo. No one is a failure when the band eats. Historians still argue whether formal sharing rules who gets what from a big kill were rigid or negotiated case by case in these deep times. Some modern forager groups insult the meat, teasing the hunter to keep pride small and community large. You've seen your elders accidentally downplay a mammoth-sized haul into a stringy thing and watched pride relax its jaw. It's a good policy. It keeps the nights friendly. As the sun tilts, you grab a pair of digging sticks and walk with two others to fetch sods for the windbreak repair. The shelter outlasts storms because you ask it to a little every day. One more row, you say, and when your back grumbles, you throw in the standard compensation. After that, one more and everyone laughs, because at least your tyranny is evenly distributed. You set the sods, tamp them with a rhythm that becomes a song, and step back to admire a new curve in the wall that remembers the wind and disagrees. Dusk paints the edges of everything with hearth-colored honesty, and shelter becomes not just logistics, but mood. Caves are nice when the map offers them like coupons. Most days, you build your own coupon from sticks, hide, sod, and charm. You've learned the lean-to that behaves in rain, the domed frame that laughs at wind, the low beehive that hoards heat like a shy treasure. You lace ribs of sapling with cordage, throw a hide weight, edges with stones, and cut a neat smoke vent that will not melt the roof or drown the fire. Mainstream fact, places like Terra Amata preserve oval hut plans from roughly 400,000 years ago. Stone rings and postmarks that shout someone slept warm here. Much later on the eastern plains of Europe, people built mammoth bone houses with tusk doorways and skull foundations, their walls draped in skins architecture that reuses ancestors into windbreaks without waste. You pressure fit 2 new poles with the quiet joy of puzzle solving. You pad a sleep spot with dried grasses twisted into mats, the old mattress hack, and put the smallest sleepers closest to the back where drafts forget them. You hang a small string of shells where a child can watch them tick. It's not a crib, mobile sure, but it plays the same spell on small eyes. Quirky tidbit: some camps hang charms of bone discs that click when air breathes wrong, an early carbon monoxide detector with personality. You sit back on your heels and run your palm along the interior seam you stitched at midday. The seam is a clean line of bone needle holes that would make a modern tailor nod. The hide lies flat because you were patient with fat and smoke and scraping. The camp around you murmurs, a grinder dresses a stone. A storyteller warms his voice with a nonsense tune. A grandmother ties a pouch for a grandchild's first kit. 2 pebbles a feather, a tiny flake, and an outrageous sense of belonging. You grin at that kit. Somewhere a museum in your future will thrill at such a find. But here it's just childhood, sturdy and portable. Food returns to the mouth as work returns to the hands. You juggle tasks because you can watch the stew, retie the windbreak, rescue a coal that rolls with delusions of adventure, fetch water without letting the fire sulk. You pull off a thin flatbread you invented from pounded seeds and root flour blistered directly on a hot stone. It tastes like patience and astonishment. You pass half to a neighbor who gave you cordage hours ago. The loop closes, the loop holds, joke 3 leans in as a child admires the shelter wall and asks why it leans. Because it's a lean-to, not a stand-up straight to you whisper, and you get the perfect mix of groan and giggle, the universal tax payment children demand from adults who dare to be funny on purpose. With night settled, the social weather turns towards story and the quiet redistribution of dignity. Someone sings a hunting song that congratulates the deer for winning today's round. The chorus includes the line everyone loves because it hits mercy and humor in the same breath. You tell a smaller tale about the rabbit and the snare that the rabbit volunteered by writing its name on the trail with its feet. And the kids laugh because they've seen those signatures. A drummer taps the heart of the group into the same beat. Feet adjust, shoulders drop, spines remember the straightness of trees. It would be easy to pretend everyone is fearless and permanent. You keep a more honest inventory. One hunter tests a wrapped ankle by flexing it in the firelight. A woman coughs not badly, but with a rhythm that makes you plan more garlic and steam tomorrow. A baby stirs, feeds, sighs, and becomes a warm rock again, under a robe of stitched fox. You quietly check the sheet rope bundle you keep near the doorway, a habit from your tenement dreams, yes, but also a practical sling and tie for storms and climbing, because a prepared mind sleeps more deeply than a clever one. Mainstream fact for your bedtime: pocket marrow and fat from tonight's stew, together with burned bones crushed and boiled for grease later, are your vitamins and your comfort. In faunal piles at ancient camps, archaeologists find bones cracked lengthwise and fire-hardened ends, signatures of people who knew that the best parts hide inside. Historians still argue whether camp layouts had formal rules, places for the skilled, the elders, the babies, or whether who slept where floated with weather and whims. In your band, elders get the warm, safer spots because not dying is a group project, and little ones get tethers of eyes, hands, and jokes rather than rope. You trace a palm on the inside wall with charcoal because earlier you saw the child's hand on the shelter next door, and hands talk to hands across time. You add a small pattern of dots that mimic the shell string's rhythm. It's not an art gallery, it's a memo. We were here, a friendly sign to tomorrow's eyes that the night went fine. A visitor from another fire circles would recognize the code without needing a dictionary. Safe, full enough, warm. The wind tests the camp with a polite push and then gets bored. Stars are busy where clouds aren't working overtime. You catch yourself counting what the day tried to remove and what you kept tools sharp, stew eaten, laugh taxes paid shelter, patched pride right-sized everyone accounted for. You feel sturdy, not shiny. You feel practiced, not lucky. You feel ready, which is the ancient word for rich. You lie down on those hides you scraped under that seam. You stitched next to a friend who snores like a friendly bear and a child who kicks like an uncooperative moon. Your last conscious act is small and exact. You reach a hand toward the ember bed and feel its whisper of heat kiss your knuckles. Yes, the fire remembers you. Yes, it will still be there. Yes, you've bought yourself another morning where success is variable, but breakfast is probable. Would you survive? Tonight you don't ask the question like a dare. You answer it with blankets, tucked knots checked, and a smile you don't have to show anyone to keep. You feed the fire the way you feed a friend. Small sticks first, then sturdier promises, and you wait for that low, confident purr that means breakfast won't have to be negotiated raw. You learned early that a hearth is not a pile of flames, but a conversation air, whispering from the windbreak gap embers, answering the pot stones, clicking quiet approval as they warm. Steam climbs the morning like a shy spirit, root slices soften, strips of yesterday's meat go glossy and forgiving. The smell changes from hard work to all right. You've earned this. You've spent enough nights with a stubborn stomach to know that a cooked mouthful is not just comfort. It's leverage, more energy, fewer surprises, less chewing, until your jaw auditions for a new career. Mainstream fact to park in your back pocket while the pot thinks habitual cooking is deep time old. At least several 100,000 years, with many researchers pointing to hearth traces around 400,000 years ago as baseline, and some arguing for earlier flickers. Either way, heat unlocks calories, softens fibers, and drops the parasite lottery odds, so your group can spend the day making choices instead of making apologies to your gut. You don't say any of that over the pot, of course. You just watch a root surrender its brittleness, and you nod like a chef who won a quiet bet. When water matters, you boil by trick because a leather bag does not love sitting directly in a flame. You line a shallow pit with hide, pour in stream water and feed it fist-sized rocks roasted in the fire until the water shivers and behaves. The sound, that shy clink of hot stone, meeting wet, becomes your timer, your lullaby, your proof that cleverness beats missing technology 9 days out of 10. You toss in wild onion, a flake of salt crystal from a far ridge, a pinch of seeds you pounded into submission at dusk, and the pot turns into a small democracy where every fragment gets to be better than itself. You manage smoke with the same courtesy you manage neighbors, a narrower vent when the wind misbehaves, a handful of green leaves on the coals when you want insects to rethink their residency, A quick fan when the fire remembers it comes from the wild and tries to leap. On colder mornings, you sit half inside the smoke on purpose, letting the fumes thread your hair and cloak, because smoke is free medicine against certain stinging, biting, burrowing ministry officials you'd prefer not to host. Historians still argue whether fire's first job in deep time was heat-cooking predator management or social glue. But your bones file the answer under all the above, while your lungs request intermissions and your eyes ask politely for less enthusiasm. Breakfast ends with the oldest ritual you own, a taste for the fire itself. You pull a coal aside and harden the point of a fresh digging stick in the embers, turning wood fibers into tough brown glass that slides into earth like a decision. You seal a woven cup by kissing its inside with smoke, so it will hold water without sulking. You heat a flake and press it into resin until the glue melts and then cools in a grip that won't forget. Hafting without metal is about patience, pressure, and the small magic of hot, sticky things wanting to be loyal. Quirky tidbit for your warming hands when the camp chews the black pitchy gum you boiled from birch bark to soften it for glue. You leave tooth marks that would make future scientists swoon. They'll pull those chewed clumps from ancient floors one day and say someone was here fixing a tool and tasting the Stone Age's worst chewing gum. You already know the tasting notes, campfire, faint aspirin, and a dare from your friends. You rotate stones out of the boiling pit the way a good drummer keeps rhythm, one in, one out. Never give the pot a reason to sulk, and your little band drifts toward the fire in that magnetic way people do when heat makes a circle and food makes a treaty. Somebody offers a handful of berries like a vote of confidence. Somebody else lays 2 tiny fish on a flat slab and turns them at the first whisper of blister. Joke one sneaks out soft as steam. You pinch a coal with 2 sticks blow and declare sous chef has opinions about doneness, and your neighbor snorts tea through her nose, which is nothing if not a review. When you've eaten, you bank the coals into a glowing island and slide a lid of damp earth half over them, so they'll sleep warm until lunch. Moving camp, you wrap a thumb-thick ember in punky fungus or dry moss and tuck it into a shell or carved cup, the ancient travel size. No one wants to marry 2 sticks for fire if they can keep yesterday's marriage alive. You rub fresh soot between finger and thumb and read it like weather, not too greasy, hot enough, clean draw through the vent. Yesterday's stuttering cough in the smoke taught you that lesson, and today the chimney of woven sticks and clay wash purrs like it respects your name. Before you stand, you do the other quiet thing. Fire asks of people who will walk far. You dry the soles of your shoes. From the outside, they're just wraps of softened hide and grass liners laced with a friendly attitude. Inside, their survival insurance drier soles mean longer mornings before blisters try to join the party. You flex your toes, pat the child who fell asleep against your knee, and listen to the last minute of the pot's whisper like you're memorizing a friend's laugh. Then you lift stow and step into a day that will judge you less by your bravery than by your maintenance. You carry your toolkit the way a city person carries keys and a wallet, without fuss, without forgetting. In your wrap, a core the size of your palm prepped with love, a hammerstone worn to a friendly oval, a tine of antler for pressure flaking, a stick you've twisted and smoothed into an atlatl spur, a pouch of resin and fiber that smells like ambition. Every stop becomes a small workshop because sharpness is a habit, not an event. You start with the core because today you want points that strike a better bargain with air. You map the flakes you want before the first tap, imagining negatives like a potter imagines space in a vase. Levallois is the move your elders taught you. With a grin, prepare the core by shaping its dome. Set the platform just so then pop off a controlled flake that lands in your palm already halfway to being a blade. Mainstream fact that prepared core method shows up widely in Middle Paleolithic sites, Neanderthals and early modern humans alike, because it wastes less stone and gifts you predictability. In a world where random is the weather, predictable is gold. You ride the antler across the new blade's edge, nibbling tiny bites out until the line vows allegiance. Then you split the tip of a light spear shaft, butter it with warm resin, slide the point home, and bind the whole marriage with a spiral of sinew that shrinks tight as it dries. You set it by the fire not too close, because cooked sinew sulks and cracked resin swears. While you wait, you thin a scraper so it will peel a hide without throwing a tantrum halfway through, and you drill a shell with the same motion you'll later use on a bone bead. Twist, twist, clear the dust. Keep the rhythm so your wrist forgives you. Around you, the band hums like a tool factory disguised as a picnic. Someone splits a rib bone to free two long, flat needles, and you feel a little flash of sincere romance. Needles with eyes are how clothing stops being wrap and hope and turns into tested against wind. You pinch a bit of sinew into threads and feed it through with the patience of a person who has worn cold as a coat. Quirky tidbit, you sometimes soothe a stubborn thread with a swipe of spit and a wish. Later, far later, someone will find needlework so fine from a cave in Siberia, they'll swear it took a lamp and a perfectionist. But you know it mostly takes a mother who refuses to let a draft win. The atlatl gets its moment because your shoulder wants easy power today. You carve the hook clean, check the balance on the dart, and practice 3 slow casts into a sand bank. The arc writes itself back into your muscles. Pull, step, release, and you grin because distance is a kind of mercy. Historians still argue whether early bands preferred thrusting spears, thrown darts, or bows first across different regions and seasons. What you know is that your people use whatever the day forgives, and no elder will scold a rabbit for being caught by a net instead of a heroic speech. Below your feet, a drainage ditch is your quarry for a different treasure. A seam of glossy black under bark where birch bleeds its secret glue. You fold bark into a lidded cone, toss it in a bed of hot coals, and let the smoke do what smoke does best, transform. When you pry it open later with a stick, the pitch inside looks like the night got tired and went solid. It will stick a point to a shaft, polish, a bowl rim, waterproof, a coil of cordage, and ruin your teeth if you can't resist chewing it while you work. Joke 2 practically writes itself. You pop a black wad into your mouth and announce new flavor, burnt forest with notes of regret. And the youngster beside you tries it anyway, the eternal contract between youth and warnings. You push your luck with bone too, because antler gives you spring, and bone gives you backbone. Barbed harpoon heads, toggling points that turn crosswise inside a fish, awls that stitch without negotiating bruises. Every day you invent devices, the future will label specialized tools, as if a stomach had ever been impressed by generalities. Mainstream fact from the Middle to Upper Paleolithic, the toolkit diversifies in many regions. Blades burins for carving grooves, backed microliths that glue into wood to make composite edges, bone needles, fish hooks and spear throwers, evidence that people invested in doing specific jobs well rather than doing one job loudly. Between tasks, you sharpen laughter against each other, like two knives sharing a stone. You tease a friend who insists on keeping a beautiful, oversized hand axe in their pouch for luck, even though you both know it mostly makes them walk lopsided. They retort that it's also a mirror, and they preen into the glossy surface like a heron. Historians still argue whether some exquisite Acheulean hand axes were everyday tools, teaching pieces, prestige items, or even love tokens with edges. You keep the debate practical. If it cuts and carries memories, you keep it. You pause to fix something less dramatic and more essential. The sling strap that saves your shoulder on long carries. You twist cordage from nettle fibers using the same two-palm roll you've used since fingers became yours. Twist, bring together. Twist again until a long, even line lies across your thighs, like a promise. Fibers don't fossilize kindly, so you overbuild, you remake, you teach the kids fast, because cordage is the hidden skeleton of your day nets, ties lashings, belts, headdresses that keep hair out of flames. Quirky tidbit field edition, a smear of crushed green plant rubbed onto your fingers. Keeps nettle sting theatrical but manageable. You call it friendship paste and pretend it works better if you flatter it. By the time the sun leans and shadows stretch like dogs, your kit is tuned like a good drum. Edges fresh bindings, tight adhesives cooling into loyalty. You slide everything into its places so you can grab in the dark without thinking, sharp on the left, heavy in the middle. Surprise in the little pocket with the feather charm, because superstition doesn't ask for much room. You stand, roll your shoulders, and feel that click in the back. That means you have exactly one more good hour before supper negotiations begin. You give the atlatl a ceremonial flex, the way some people tap a door frame, and you thank the day for letting you practice skills that keep the word tomorrow in circulation. You make your hands into containers before you make containers with your hands cupped. Palms to carry a shared drink to a friend, hollowed cloak to gather berries. But improvisation loves an upgrade. Today you string a gourd you cured last moon with a net of cordage so it won't slip, and you knot a strap that keeps the slosh from slapping your hip raw. A child brings you a bladder from a goatish-sized animal with a grin that says, "I found a water bag." And you rinse, tie, rinse again, then fill it with a pride your future self will drink without grumbling. At camp, someone weaves rushes into a basket using the over-under lullaby, that turns grass into architecture. You join them, split, soak, bend, coax, and a sturdy bowl grows thumb by thumb. Mainstream fact: plant containers and baskets don't preserve nicely, but where they do rarely, you see ancient craftsmanship as tight as any modern market. Elsewhere, you meet their ghosts in impressions on clay in stone weights, for looms in wear patterns that shout carried filled, used again. You press the damp basket into its own shadow and say, hold, and it does. Clay has your number too. You find a sticky bank by the stream, pinch off a ball and roll it into a coil that snakes into a small pot, when you spiral it upward with a wet thumb smoothing the seams. Will it survive a rude fire? Maybe if you nurse it dry first, slide it into warm sand beside the coals, then give it more heat than a breeze and less than a tantrum. Someone in a land you'll never see will make pottery as early as 20,000 years, before your distant descendants pick up agriculture thin, fire-kissed vessels for boiling and storing. But here you stage the rehearsal mud that holds water without becoming a ghost. Quirky tidbit from the other side of your map, out on hot, dry plains, far south of your world. People drill and plug ostrich eggshells to make canteens light, strong, and strangely elegant. You try the same trick with a large shell you scavenged, and find that carved bone stoppers feel strangely ceremonial, like sealing a story into a seed. You scratch a tiny mark on the shell your sign, because losing a water vessel feels like arguing with the day before it starts. Clothing is the house you take everywhere, and you've become the architect. A good hide begins with the hunt, but after that it's your patience, not the animals, that matters. You soak to loosen hair if you want leather scrape with a sharp flake, until your wrists write poetry about endurance work in fat or brains, to soften smoke to push out ghosts of rot. Then cut with the candor of someone who knows wind personally. Bone needles with drilled eyes make stitches that laugh at drafts. Sinew thread swells when damp to seal holes, as if the garment loves you back. Mainstream fact: some of the oldest needles with eyes show up in Upper Paleolithic layers. Genetic studies of body lice suggest even earlier clothing habits, perhaps 100 to 170,000 years ago, because lice that prefer cloth need well cloth. You don't care about the exact number at bedtime. You care that the child's hood doesn't let the night in. Historians still argue whether tailored clothing first blooms in colder northern zones and slowly drifts everywhere, or whether multiple groups invented seams the way multiple groups invented jokes independently and out of need. Your band solves the debate by sewing when it's cold, draping when it's hot, and laughing at anyone who pretends one rule fits all weather, all bodies, all days. You finish a cape's hem with a neat whip stitch, then teach a teen the trick of joining two hides hair in, so the seam stays waterproof when snow thinks it owns the road. You notch a belt to accept a small knife and a flake in a wrap, because hands should never be alone outside eyeshot of a hearth. You lace sandals with twisted bark fiber where ground eats softer shoes, and you nurse soft moccasins where quiet matters more than thorns. Quirky tidbit wardrobe department, a little ash rubbed into fresh tanned hide takes the glare down and turns, "Look at my new cloak," into "I've always owned this. Please ignore me, Lynx." Shelter keeps expanding its resume the way good shelters do. You've already thrown hides over saplings and taught sod the shape of kindness. But today you add small conveniences that make a fragile house feel stubborn. A raised sleeping mat of woven branches to let air move under your back. A tiny shelf braided from roots to lift bowls out of puddles. A drip edge of bark shingles along the windward face that channels rain away like manners at a crowded doorway. Mainstream fact reprise with texture, oval foundations at terra amata, deep post. Holes under ancient dunes, rings of stone that once pinned hides mammoth bone walls at places like Meshirish. Archaeology keeps slipping you blueprints, and you use them with the same liberty a cook uses a recipe someone else wrote. As you arrange tools on the shelf, a neighbor remembers they promised you a coil of cord. They hand it over with the casual grace that keeps bands glued, and you swap them, a pouch of powdered ochre, because color matters even when the stomach is in charge. You mix a little ochre with animal fat to mark a pattern on a hide. Cut here, stitch there. Then dab 2 fingerprints near the doorway because doors like company. You've seen kids press hands to cave walls and blow pigment until a halo forms an absence made visible. Any rock that keeps a secret will carry those hands longer than any of your shelters will last. That's the math of art in your world. Fragile houses, stubborn marks, memories dressed in minerals. Joke 3 drifts in while you check the fit of a new hood on a small head. The child scowls with solemn concentration, then says, "I can't hear the wind anymore." You stage whisper back, "Good, don't let it hear us either," and the scowl cracks into that gap-toothed, empire-defeating smile that powers entire migrations. Dusk nudges the rim of the pot. You taste just with salt. If luck traded you a lick-sized crystal recently and plate with the oldest technology's fingers and gratitude. You roll a bit of hot flatbread and tuck in a spoon of stew because good food wants a ride. Then hand it to the person who took the worst thorn today without writing a song about it. Around the fire, containers you made in the morning, whole dinner you made in the afternoon, clothes you sewed in last moon's cold let you soak up heat without paying a price at midnight, and tools you sharpened in the shade lie where you can reach them when stars suggest chewing on a story. Before sleep, you do a last small circuit, the patrol of the practical bank, the coals under their ash blanket, tip the gourd so it won't leak the night away. Hang the bladder on a peg, fold the cloak where morning hands can find it, tuck the needle into its bone tube and tie the pot's lid with a string that reminds rats of their other plans. You breathe and the shelter breathes with you. If tomorrow asks what you've built besides appetites, you can point at the house you wear the bowl that doesn't complain, the seam that doesn't let winter in the pot that holds a village in one handful, and the tools that turn days from random into roomy. You lie down against the new stitched seam and smile because your world is still stone and skin, but it's also design, taste, habit, and love with handles. You wake to the soft, practical chorus of a small community doing childcare without paperwork. No diapers, no strollers, no gadget that plays lullabies on command, just arms hides moss and a schedule written by tiny lungs. The baby on your chest has slept half on your heartbeat and half on the fading warmth of last night's coals. You adjust the sling, a strip of softened hide you've threaded across your shoulder and under the opposite arm, so the weight sits close, high and friendly. There's no nursery. There's a circle aunties by blood and by boldness. Older kids who practice gentleness like a new game grandmothers whose hands move before your words finish, and fathers who carry bounce and swap tasks because the morning doesn't care about categories, only competence. Milk is breakfast comfort and medicine, and it travels wherever you do. Mainstream fact steadies the rhythm you already live in. Many recent hunter-gatherer societies, breastfeeding often continues 2 to 4 years, sometimes longer, spacing births naturally through lactational amenorrhea and giving tiny immune systems a head start, while mothers keep moving, working and sleeping in small negotiable blocks. You don't quote hormones, you just read the baby's face and answer before the ask turns urgent. When the weather cooperates, you wash both of you in the stream and laugh when the child decides water is a cousin. When it doesn't, you wipe with clean leaves, a damp cloth, or a handful of crushed aromatic greens that make fresh smell like a meadow. Quirky tidbit has roots in northern forests. Soft sphagnum moss, springy, absorbent and mildly acidic, has served as a natural diapering material for some later peoples. You know the plant as forest sponge, and while you don't have a brand name for it, you do have a habit of stuffing a little into a hide wrap on travel days. Discipline in your camp is less thunder and more physics. The fire's edge teaches the boundary with heat you can feel before it hurts. Streams teach balance. Thorns file opinions on sprinting. Adults nudge hands away from knives with a murmured, practiced mine. Now yours later, and you praise any instinct that looks like caution. Historians still argue whether Paleolithic parenting was stern or permissive, ritualized or casual, mostly maternal or broadly communal. But your day files the answer under distributed. Whoever's closest keeps the child whole, and whoever's freest picks up the task that's getting slippery. You spread a hide and turn it into a playpen with stones along the edge. A cousin demonstrates gently with a beetle. An elder starts a rhyme that enumerates the things not to touch in an order a toddler can dance to. A teen ad-libs a verse about porcupines, and the entire camp votes for a repeat. You don't own toys, you commission them from the world. A smooth river stone becomes a rattle once you cup it in a shell. A feather becomes a brush for a cheek, a round of bark, 2 holes a thong, and suddenly you have a little spinning buzz toy that hums as it whips between small hands. A stick with a notch is both bow practice someday, and today we draw lines in the dust. When it's time to feed mashed roots to a mouth still learning about chewing, you pre-chew a bit yourself. Yes, politely, because the future has not yet invented a blender and the present doesn't mind sharing. Joke 1 earns its whisper, you call yourself the chief food processor, and the auntie beside you raises an imaginary crown to match your job description. Nap strategy is wearable. You loosen the sling just enough that the baby can slide from chest to hip without waking. You squat, not bend, because a back that lasts until evening is the real luxury. You swing the weight easy to the side when you need both hands to scrape a hide or turn a stone. When you sit with purpose near heat. When the air bites near shade, when the sun writes its rules too loudly near the door of the shelter, when weather is rehearsing another song. You line the baby's wrap with soft grass or scraped bark fibers that breathe, and you tuck in a sliver of good smell, crushed sweet fern or rosemary, part perfume, part insect deterrent, part comfort, ritual the child will associate with safe forever. You don't keep charts, you keep patterns. If the child coughs strange, you give steam and quiet. If a rash appears, you change the plant you've been using under the wrap. If sleep becomes a rumor, you trade shifts with another pair of arms and let your mind relearn its own name for an hour. Mainstream fact drifts past the firelight without diapers. You practice elimination communication, the ancient habit of watching timing and holding a baby out over a safe spot, so camp floors stay friendly, and so the little body learns its cues before language bothers with nouns. You smile at how quickly the rhythm returns after a journey, how a baby can teach your hands clocks you never knew you owned. And woven through the work of today is the first syllabus every human community masters: safety rituals, weather sense, and kindness. You mark the no trees with a dab of bitter sap, so little tongues learn without drama. You touch every blade and pointy thing while naming them gently, because fear wastes time. But respect makes time. When you need to be stern, you compress your voice instead of sharpening it. There's no prison besides the arms that carry, and that prison keeps letting the prisoner sleep on your heart. When chores find their cruising altitude and the fire dials back to murmuring stories, come out like blankets, light enough to fold, warm enough to matter. You don't proclaim, you begin. You walk the ridge, you say, and the wind tells you what the deer told it. You press a finger into dust to draw a bent line. The old trail, the new detour, the place the ground looks tired because a herd passed last rain. The kids lean in until all you can see are eyebrows. The elders cut in with corrections you pretend to dislike but secretly love. The story becomes a map, a weather report, a family tree of places, and an ethics class disguised as a fox who gets away because it listened better than it bragged. Music shows up like a good cousin, invited and useful. Someone pulls a length of bird bone from a wrapper hollow, with finger holes teased open with patience, and a bit of flint, and coaxes a line of notes out that make the hair on your arms behave. Mainstream fact walks into the circle and finds a seat. Some of the oldest known flutes on record come from places like Hohlefels and Geisenklusterle in present-day Germany, carved from vulture bone and mammoth ivory roughly 40,000 years ago. Their holes are spaced like intention, not accident, which is a poet's way of saying, this was music on purpose. You've never seen those caves, but your hands know how a bone wants to sing once it's lightened and disciplined. Percussion is democracy. Anything can vote. A skin stretched over a hollow log, a drum torqued into shape by pegs and cord, gives you heartbeat under the stars. A gourd filled with seeds becomes a shaker that imitates rain. A pair of smooth sticks find a rhythm your feet translate into steps. And suddenly the entire camp knows where together is without counting. You hum while you braid, you chant while you grind, you swap melodies with the child on your hip, until the day slips its shoulders and sits down beside you. Quirky tidbit from your own kitchen rattle bracelets made of shells and teeth tied around ankles keep toddlers in tempo and within earshot style surveillance and groove in one budget accessory. You teach with call and response baking memory into breath. You sing the plants safe to touch, the ones worth boiling, twice the ones that taste like confidence until tomorrow's stomach votes no. You answer with a verse about water rules, boil it if it looks smug, share it if the day is kind, carry more than you boast. Historians still argue whether early music primarily soothed infants, synchronized labor, signaled across distance, or braided groups into trust. Your camp's answer tonight is a shrug and a chorus, because it's doing all of that before the second verse finishes trying to be clever. Not every instrument is a bone. Some are air wearing a trick. A bull roarer flat sliver of wood on a long cord whirs as you spin it, the pitch dipping and rising like a storm rehearsing. It's a message to the folks beyond the trees that you live. Your fine and dinner smells like something worth walking toward. A mouth bow sings when you hum into it. A leaf whistles if you fold it just right. A hollow reed turns into a reed pipe. If the gods of patience decide your knife is behaving, joke too earns its little napper cousin, warbles through a thin strip of bark, and declares they've invented portable thunder, and someone else claps solemnly as if patents are due at dawn. The first audience is always the baby. You bounce in time, you sway, you give that simple two-note lullaby. The elders swear works on goats too, and you feel the body against yours loosen its list of complaints. The rhythm you keep is older than language and younger than your last headache. Your own breathing aligns, and for a luxurious moment, you believe even the smoke is listening. Around you, people have started carving, scraping, mending in tempo points, sharpen without hurrying, thread slides through hide without sulking, and the fire behaves like a metronome with opinions. When the song ends, the story picks up without a seam. You tell the one about the winter, when the river grew mean and the fish grew clever. How the group tried nets, weirs, patience, prayer, and eventually a trick with light on water that sent shadows scurrying into baskets. How the lesson wasn't the trick. It was the order of attempts and the rules about sharing when the luck finally remembered your names. A child asks if the fox from earlier makes a cameo, and you say of course it does. Everything worth learning gets stars in everything else. Mainstream fact folds in politely, oral traditions in foraging societies carry hunting, law, plant knowledge, travel routes and lore. Trained ears can hear ecological calendars in epics, harvest schedules in myths, and safety codes in jokes thin enough to float across a fire. Someone wedges a bone between a blade and a branch, and brushes red ochre into a curve on bark, the arc of a sling throw annotated with thumbprints. You watch the making more than the mark. That's the real class. The child beside you makes their own version in charcoal, overshooting the curve like ambition, and you hide your grin behind your hand because ambition deserves a longer leash than accuracy. At least for a few seasons. You pass the charcoal back without edits because the world will do plenty of editing by itself. And then as night begins to pretend, the flute returns with a melody that sounds like breath finally letting itself be honest. The baby sighs, the elders soften, and even the person you count on to be skeptical fell asleep leaning against the hearthstone, mouth open, snoring on the off beats like percussion with self-esteem. You tuck an edge of hide over their shoulder and feel ridiculously rich, a circle with heat, a song with memory, and a child who decided to forgive the day. You walk before dawn to check a limestone wall, the old ones like a place where the valley's wind breaks its stride, and the rock keeps secrets with excellent manners. Inside the cave drinks your torchlight and answers with its own, a ceiling pricked with calcite stars, a floor that remembers paws, knees, and the occasional proud belly, a wall with a pale patch that feels like invitation. You press your right hand to the cool surface and blow pigment ochre mixed with fat and spit through a hollow reed until your hand goes from present to absence, from skin to silhouette. When you lift, your ghost remains a negative hand, small and stubborn, a promise you were here when the day was too busy to write it down for you. Mainstream fact, measured and careful, stands just behind your shoulder. Hand stencils and prints, sometimes in red or black, appear in caves from Spain to Indonesia. Some of the oldest European examples, dated by uranium thorium on the mineral crust over pigment, reach back roughly 40,000 years, older than many famous animal paintings, older than the shelters you've slept in, by an order of magnitude. Historians still argue whether the making was ritual, roll call, art lesson, initiation, or we found a good wall and we're not leaving without a mark. You roll with all of it because the truth lives in how your chest feels when the outline dries, light, proud, a little fierce, like laughter you didn't have to explain. You don't always use hands. Sometimes a fingertip dipped in grease draws lines into soft clay. A winding maze later, writers will call finger flutings, and your camp's small kids have a signature parallel grooves, spaced like their tiny knuckles, an entire generation scribbling, present with the attention span of a sparrow and the sincerity of a sunrise. Quirky tidbit turns up in a quiet corner, a stencil missing a phalanx or two, a finger bent against the rock to hide a joint. Later minds will argue frostbite ritual or just bent for effect. But you remember how cold bit last moon, and you choose kindness for the old hand that left the shape. The animals get their turn when an elder with patience begins to outline a bison's shoulder with a torch-lit curve that makes you gasp. The trick is not accuracy, but energy, the way a line can suggest a mass, the way 4 legs can become 6 when you want to show a gallop with one body in one moment. Charcoal shadows under ochre bellies make ribs glow. A quick scraped highlight on a horn turns flat into angle. spray of dots becomes breath in cold air if you squint right. You're not decorating a living room, you're collaborating with stone to remind minds of the animals' hungers and paths of the way they stand before they fall, of the respect owed to meat that used to have ideas. Outside the cave group, life flexes and resettles around people like you, the way water learns a new stone. Partnerships here are negotiated more than notarized. Practical, affectionate, recombinable when season or safety dictates. What matters most is that children have a web of arms, that elders have listeners and soup, that hunters and gatherers, healers and fire coaxers, nappers and singers all get to be someone's, "Oh good, you're here," when trouble looks for courage. Historians still argue whether Paleolithic bands were egalitarian by necessity or by preference, whether leadership was situational or sticky, whether decisions were consensus, charisma, or the person with the map in their head wins at dusk. You keep the debate tidy. Whoever does the job best this week gets the nod, and resentment gets 12 heartbeats to speak before it has to volunteer for something useful. At dusk, you carry the day's small hoard berries, a lucky rabbit, a joke you saved, back to the central fire, where gossip is currency and kindness compound interest. Someone's child has a fever. You trade watch with their mother so she can sleep one unbroken hour under a sky that pretends to care. Medicine is improvisation and observation, rest, warmth. Water that has remembered to be clean, poultices you learned from someone who learned from someone who listened to a plant until it began to talk. You keep the patient near the edge of the light where coughs walk slower. You whisper the steady lies that help bodies decide to try. You are safe. We are here. Morning owes us. And between care tasks, you return to the wall in your head where your hand now glows in negative. The shelters you build will fall. The fireplaces you tend will blur into soil. The tools you love will become rocks again with edges. The art might last. It might survive roof collapses, floods, and bats with worse manners than your favorite toddler. It might greet a stranger centuries upon centuries later and whisper, "I was warm, I was hungry, I tried to be kind, I loved this animal," and the line it makes across a hunter's thoughts. The thought makes you breathe softer. You tuck the baby closer. You place your palm over the hard beat of your own chest and imagine the outline of that too, on stone, the oldest drum still working. Joke 3 pads in quiet feet as the night rounds itself. You look at the hand stencil and say, "If I leave my left hand too, does that make it a matched set? Or just me reminding future folks I had options?" Someone snorts, someone shushes, someone kisses the baby's head like signing a treaty with sleep. The group tightens by inches as if warmth were a law that required unanimous consent. Mainstream fact finds a last perch. The music, the marks, the way you share children and food. These are the technologies that travel best, that don't break when dropped, that remain when tools rust, that convince tomorrow to consider you politely. By the time the stars show edges, you've threaded the day's childcare through the loom of story and the shuttle of song. You've watched a tiny person learn the difference between hot and bright, between mine and ours, between noise and music with a job. You've left a sign on a wall that could outlive your grandchildren's names. And you've tightened the cords that keep a small band elastic instead of brittle memory play rhythm, attention, respect. You lie back feeling the cave at your spine and the night on your face, and you practice the oldest lullaby shape long in longer, out the little pause where gratitude fits like a bead between breaths. You feel the camp breathing in one long shared exhale after the morning's rush, the kind of calm that doesn't mean nothing to do, only everything is happening cooperatively. You move through it like a stitch, mend here, carry there, listen in the middle. Nobody reads a schedule, everyone reads each other. If a hunter returns limping, the person closest with steady hands cleans the cut. If the foragers come in grinning with bulging net bags, 3 children materialize as porters and 2 elders become quality control with opinions. If a grandmother starts a song about wood that burns too fast, half the camp looks up at the same time and checks their fuel piles. Group cohesion isn't a speech. It's choreography you learn by standing near it until your feet copy the steps. Mainstream fact hums beneath the scene like a low drum. Mobile foraging bands commonly cluster around 24 souls 20-30, sometimes more in a season, and flow outward or fuse in again as food and feelings dictate a fission-fusion rhythm seen across many recent hunter-gatherer societies. You live that math without naming it, when berries are shouting small teams peel off. When meat lands hot, a message ripples outward and the circle thickens around fire and fat. The glue is not a single leader barking orders, it's a web kin by blood and kin by promise, tight enough to carry weight, loose enough not to strangle. You keep an ear tuned for friction and an eye tuned for prevention. A joke goes a hair too sharp, and you sand it down with a gentler punchline. 2 teens posture over whose spear throws truer, and you cheer the wind instead of the thrower, which makes the wind the winner, and the teens forget what they were proving. When resources feel thin, you don't lecture. You produce 3 small tasks with visible endings, because finishing together calms hunger's loudest stories. Historians still argue whether Paleolithic bands were deeply egalitarian, gently ranked by age and skill, or peppered with charismatic specialists who rose for a season and sat down again. Your day files that debate under situational whoever knows the trail when fog rolls in becomes chief until the fog learns manners. Signals stitch the web. You recognize the child cry that means tired versus the one that means thorn, the whistle that means look up hawks, and the clap pattern that means your fire wants company. A forager's apron braided fibers, darkened with ochre stripes, flashes from the tree line, and you know the new sweet bulbs not far bring digging sticks. The hunter who hums a certain 2 notes as he enters camp is telling you gently he saw nothing larger than rabbits. The aunt who hums back in mockery is telling him just as gently that rabbits are a feast if the company is right. Joke 1 tiptoes in and bows. The only title that sticks around here is person who remembers where we left the good basket, and even that one expires once the basket moves. You lean into the flexible bonds that make all this possible. Partners sleep together and sometimes work apart. Sometimes they swap tasks, sometimes they swap tents for a season if tempers fray or if moons ask for different arrangements. Children trail after whoever tells the most interesting story with the most interesting pockets. Elders trade sitting for teaching as if the camp owes them rent in attention. When a cousin's grief makes their hands clumsy, you quietly assemble a harvesting party that doesn't ask them to lead. When your own patience thins, someone puts a cup in your hand and a harmless chore in your lap until you can be trusted near sharp things again. Nothing formal changes, everyone notices anyway. Trust wears jewelry. On your wrist, a braid of sinew knotted with 3 white beads tells everyone which traveling band you traded with last spring. On your neck, a disc of river shell polished to a soft moon whispers to strangers you approached a coast far away, or at least approached someone who did. Mainstream fact taps your shoulder. Ostrich eggshell beads, small drilled strung, appear across southern Africa tens of thousands of years ago and trace social networks that spanned long distances. Styles cluster and drift the way dialects do a cartography of friendships you can wear. You finger your own beadwork when conversations wobble. It's hard to be rude to a person whose necklace says my aunt knows your aunt's aunt. Rituals keep the knitting from unraveling. The newcomer's fire is lit with coals borrowed from your hearth, then returned, warmed and blessed with grease. Anybody who eats first lifts a morsel toward the sky and toward the ground, not because you expect the sky to bite, but because gratitude is excellent weatherproofing. Before the big hunt, you don't beg an animal to volunteer, you promise each other aloud to waste nothing and to mean it. Quirky tidbit from camp politics: when tempers climb too high for tools to be trusted, the elders declare a silent soup. Everyone chops, no one talks. All the onions mysteriously get chopped smaller than usual, and by the time the pot is done, the argument has usually evaporated like steam that changed its mind. In the afternoon light, you watch 3 tasks form a braid. Someone naps a new point, someone sings a work song about dull blades, someone else tells the child with the enthusiastic stick how to wave rhythm without whacking kneecaps. You float between them, adding your small strength where it raises the total, and catch yourself smiling at how the camp's energy settles dense near the fire, feathery at the edges, like a living lung. If survival here were only about food and fire, it would already have failed. It's about 1,000 small courtesies carried out fast enough that trouble never quite gets a chance to feel welcome. Even close communities creak. Yours greases the joints with stories and strategic distance. When 2 hunters keep choosing the same path and the same sarcasm, you quietly plan tomorrow, so each shadows a different elder, and you send them out at staggered dawns with different tasks and the same blessing. If a couple's laughter grows brittle, you rearrange sleeping places just for a moon, so each wakes among different snores and different jokes, letting affection regrow without the pressure of debate. Nobody publishes a decree. Everybody feels the room get roomier. Your politics is practical: move air through the tent and fires breathe better. Trade days sharpen the cohesion you already trust. A visiting band pads in with dust on their ankles and news in their pockets. A stand of fat-rooted reeds, 2 days' walk downstream. A bend in the river where salmon reopen negotiations. A rumor of strangers wearing beads carved from black glass that flints your curiosity obsidian, perhaps from a place the map in your head hasn't earned yet. You lay out your extras points that throw true a coil of plant fiber twine, ochre lumps in 3 shades, and a little carved something that does nothing except say, "My hands can be patient." And you browse their blanket with your fingers, because fingers do better deals than mouths. You don't haggle loud. You compliment the work and your counterpart feels seen, which makes generosity a lot more affordable. Mainstream fact folds into this barter like salt into stew. Long-distance movement of materials, shells and pigments, stone that can't be traced to the hill you're sitting on, testifies that networks stretched far beyond the day's walk. Knowledge partners and obligations walked those paths right alongside the beads. You've never said the word alliance, but you wear one and you feed one pork when boar lucks your way. Historians still argue whether these networks mostly swapped essentials, mostly swapped ornaments, or mostly swapped promises that kept conflicts from becoming holidays for the vultures. You practical as ever say yes, then add and jokes because jokes travel well and spend like coins. Adornment is not vanity here. It's a bulletin board wrapped around a pulse. You dust your hairline with red ochre. Not a thick mask, just a brush along places the sun and wind scold because the color says alive louder than your voice can. And because on a cold evening, that smear of iron smell feels like companionship. The elders dab black stripes along cheekbones for a rite that marks a child's first successful day carrying their own bundle. You press a thumbprint of yellow along a friend's forearm. When grief loosens its hold, a visible "I see you" that stays through one wash and one sleep. Quirky tidbit steps out of your medicine bag. Sometimes you soften birch bark pitch by chewing it before you glue a habit that leaves your tooth marks in little black tiles future strangers will puzzle over. It tastes like smoke and secrets, and you spit it out when it stops listening. Conflict resolution has a playbook. No one admits is a playbook. If jealousy slinks in with wet feet, you host a story night where every tale stars someone who shared cleverly and didn't die of it. If pride builds a little hut in a hunter's heart, you ask them to teach a novice because explaining a throw is humbler than bragging about one. If grief shows up wearing anger's jacket, you declare an unnecessary feast and make everyone too full to shout. When none of that works, you practice the simplest technology you own: distance. Camps fission, for reasons no one has to defend. This valley's berries are finishing. Those hills look promising, and reunite after tempers have burned themselves down to ash that feeds next season's green. By evening, cohesion takes its most ordinary shape, chores done, in a rhythm that looks like care. You plait a broken thong while a neighbor skins a rabbit and hums a tune about patience. Across the fire, a trade partner from last year shows a teen how to straighten a spear shaft over coals. the two of them grinning the same crooked grin as the wood decides to be honest. You lean back and feel the circle hum, all small negotiations adding up to one large we. Joke 2 arrives with impeccable timing. The youngest cousin declares themselves chief of holding things while you fix them, and the camp, high on titles today, approves the appointment with a chorus of extremely serious nods. You walk the perimeter to check shelters after wind crawls through at dusk. Most of your homes are practical poems, built from whatever the place offers. Bent saplings arched and thatched hides over ribs of wood, a rock face, turned into wall with a lean-to's mind, and none of them care about posterity. They care about not leaking. You wedge a new stake rub, a weak spot, with fat to hush the squeak, and tie a charm of braided grass to the door lash, not because it's magic, but because every time someone sees it, they remember to tie the knot tight. If a roof sags, the fix is not a lament. It's 4 hands and a joke about roofs who forget it's their job not to be flaws. Supper turns cohesion into flavor. Meat tastes better for having been divided fairly. Roots taste sweeter for being dug to the rhythm of a song you didn't know you knew until your hands kept time without asking. Berries turn into syrup and gossip. Fat turns into quiet. Before anyone reaches for seconds, somebody lifts a portion aside for the elder who's nursing an ankle and for the child who fell asleep in the sling while negotiating with a carrot. The fire approves with a noise like consent. If you wanted to define group, you could do worse than that, who saves you a piece when you're late. After eating, you carry a small ember and an old story to a wall that will outlive both. It isn't the same cave you touched this morning. This one is a shallow shelter with a ceiling low enough to make even the tall people respectful. At the back, wind can't reach, soot can't escape, images stay. You light a twist of grass blow until it stops arguing, and watch the smoke climb into a pocketed ceiling that has seen more winters than your language has words for. The shelters you throw together in an afternoon will be gone next season. This place gathers seasons like beads. Mainstream fact lays out its patient ledger. The mammoth bone houses on the Ukrainian plains, built some 15,000 years ago, leave circles of tusk and hearth ash. The terra amata huts at the coast, far older, left post holes and a scatter of stones. But paint on limestone hand stencils, dots animal forms traced and shaded, can hold fast for tens of millennia if water and time forgive. That's the trick your hands keep returning to make marks where rain can't argue. Historians still argue whether these rooms were classrooms, theaters, shrines, or seasonal studios. Your night files the answer under storage for meaning because you keep depositing it here like fat against famine. You wet ochre with spit, press your palm over a flake that rings like a plate when tapped, and blow until your wrist tingles. When you lift the negative hand, looks like a cave has learned your name. Next to it, a smaller hand, someone's child bold, and a little sticky appears after a giggle and a sputter. 2 fingertips swipe a little crescent under it as if to say, "Moon saw this." Quirky tidbit waits in a dripstone shadow in one famous cave. Footprints of a child and the prints of a canid wander side by side through ancient mud. Scholars will weigh strides and claw angles and keep changing their minds. Dog friend on a brave outing or wolf trailing a curious small human, while you practical as always, just hope the adult who cleaned those little feet afterward had warm water and a steady laugh. Your own camp's art agrees with your camp's politics. It's collaborative. One person blows pigment, another catches drips with a handful of moss, a third scratches a line to suggest the lean of a reindeer. You shade the belly that needs weight. The result is less ownership and more we made a door you can remember walking through. You outline a figure, bending a bow, not to brag, but to demonstrate a posture you want the adolescents to feel in their ribs. Someone else adds a series of dots near the animal's chest, maybe breaths, maybe a story. Maybe this is how many of us tried. Historians still argue whether these marks record events, call events into being, or keep events from swallowing memory. Your answer is easier. The marks help the next throw land truer because the hand that throws has stared long at what it means to miss. On the way back to camp, you pass a rock where everyone leaves something. 3 beads, a knot of grass, a small bone carved with a spiral you learned from a shell, and you slip a sliver of your loaf there, a crumb big enough to be ceremonial and small enough to be sensible. You aren't bargaining with spirits, you're bargaining with tomorrow's version of yourself, promising that there will be something worth visiting again besides problems. Joke 3 arrives in a warm, tired voice you dub the rock, the department of future gratitude, and the elder beside you who loves inventions replies, "Hours always open, complaints accepted only in song." Night refolds the camp into a circle of small constellations too. Here chatting over sinew and needles. 3, they're converting a thick hide into 2 thinner ones. And 4 jokes, a pair of teens tossing and catching an ember on a shovel of bark to practice not spilling luck. The fire keeps the bugs honest and the leopards uninterested. The smoke tucks itself into your hair and decides to stay till a stream says otherwise. You pass around a shell filled with fat thinned to kindness. Each person takes a fingertip and glosses cracked knuckles, then swipes the remainder along a tool's handle, because handles too behave better when remembered. The talk drifts from logistics to biography and back. Someone tells how a shelter fell and didn't break a leg because a neighbor's snore woke them early. Someone else confesses they dropped a fish twice and the river returned it both times. So clearly, the river was committed and they were simply cooperating. An elder sings a short song about the 2 best words in any language, still here, and you feel your shoulders climb down from a worry you hadn't noticed you were carrying. You look around the circle and see the infrastructure that never gets named in cave art, the careful listening, the division of leftovers, the way feet arrange themselves to make space for a returning hunter and for a crawling child. Mainstream fact returns for a soft coda traces from the deep past show care extended beyond productivity. Healed injuries that would have required months of help. Elders who lived long enough to outlive teeth. Burials with goods that signal you mattered. That more than any single tool is the technology that keeps your small world from tearing the patient insistence that even when hands can't haul, hearts still hold weight. Whether that care grew from sentiment, strategy, or some braided cord of both, is an argument scholars will happily continue. You who have been carried and have carried call it the only respectable fashion. Before sleep, cohesion gets one last rehearsal. You bank the fire for the night, lay a circle of stones a hand's width outside the coals, so a barefoot child won't wander close without feeling a warning, and prop 2 embers in a clay bowl for the pre-dawn cook who wakes first. You touch 3 shoulders as you pass the elder with the ankle, the cousin with the new baby, the teen who pretends not to like being reassured, and you feel the camp answer in sighs and little shifts, a murmured call and response, only bodies hear. When you finally slide under your hide, the stars leak through the roof lashings in tidy pinpricks, like someone miscounted and left holes where light can come test the room. You roll onto your side palm on your chest and think of the mark drying on the cave wall, your hand as absence, your presence as warmth among companions, your proof of belonging, more durable than a tent stake and more fragile than a laugh. The shelters will go, the songs will change key, the bead styles will wander like herds, but the habit, gather, share, repair, remember outlasts even the paint, because you've taught it to children who will teach it to theirs until some future friend of rock and darkness stands where you stood and whispers, "Still here." And sleep takes you the moment after that, like a pact, the night signs in your stead. You wake from a short, kind nap to the small hiss of water on warm stones and the not quite music of triage that every camp knows. Someone rinses a scrape, someone twists fibers into a binding, someone else hums to distract a child who keeps trying to inspect their own scab with the seriousness of a scholar. Improvised medicine here isn't a tent with a sign. It's a mood that spreads faster than panic. You squat beside the limping hunter from yesterday, unlace the rawhide thong at their ankle, and press the swelling with 2 fingers. The way you were taught, look for heat, look for the hurt that jumps before the mouth does. You wrap with softened bark strips and a sling of woven grass, then make the smartest prescription you own: sit, eat, let the camp do its job. Your aunt passes you a pinch of willow bark shavings to tuck in the patient's cheek. The taste is bitter and convincing, the kind that tells worry it's been heard. Mainstream fact walks in politely salicylate rich barks, and leaves show up in many forager pharmacopoeias and ancient mouths. Even trap traces of such plant chemicals in dental calculus clues that pain relief wasn't a stranger long before laboratories learned to bottle it. You do nothing fancy for the cough in the grandmother's chest. Only steam rest and a warm stone tucked into the blanket where the chill keeps rehearsing. A good nursing rotation solves what heroics can't. So you build one without naming it. 3 people with patient hands and decent jokes. Take turns sitting 2 more. Make sure the pot keeps offering broth that tastes like comfort first and food second. Historians still argue whether Paleolithic bands had healers in anything like a formal sense, whether some hands gathered more plant knowledge and reputation, or whether care flowed so evenly through the group that titles never got a chance. Either way, the outcome you aim for is simple and unambiguous, more daylight for the sick to look at tomorrow. Your kit looks humble and works like it enjoys the work. Sinew stitches skin as effectively as it stitches hide, provided you boil it first and keep your needle honest. Charcoal paste darkens a cut, so flies reconsider their plans. Clay poultices pull the sting and the story out of a bite. Fat seals a scab against weather that doesn't mind your feelings. The quirk you love most is a green one, a bag of dried bog moss, springy clean, mildly sour in a way that suggests it doesn't like company. Waiting to be crumbled into dressings that soak and soothe. Much, much later, people will praise sphagnum in big wars with big words, but you already know its trick and don't waste it. You're careful, not superstitious about blood you rinse with warmed boiled water and keep rags separate for sick and for everything else. And you lay them in sun when sun exists, because sunlight is free and seems to enjoy killing problems. Bones knit because time does the heavy lifting, and the camp does the rest. A friend's cracked forearm sits quiet between split willow slats bound with bark. You change the lashings when the swelling stops, trying to make a point, and you hand them the easiest tool first, a scraper, not a spear, so usefulness returns before pride does. Fresh injuries always draw audiences. You manage the crowd with a gossip and jobs hold this bowl. Count these breaths. Tell that story where someone tripped and lived happily ever after anyway. Joke one lands where fear was sitting. You declare yourself chief of not touching it yet. And the patient laughing commands everyone to obey your new rank for at least 2 cups of broth. People here don't argue with convalescence. They negotiate it. You swap tasks so a cut hand still earns pride, more shelling, less splitting. More singing, fewer sharp opinions. More watching the kids while pretending you're terrible at catching so they can be the heroes. Food bends toward healing when it can richer in fat, softer on teeth, saltier if the day sweat too much out of you. The pot, like a good friend, sneaks extra into the quiet bowl and pretends it wasn't intentional. Sleep, the most honest medicine, earns the camp's protection. You shush dogs and cousins. You move loud chores farther from the tent. You bank the fire so its breathing matches the patient's. You stock your small pharmacy the way you stock your pantry seasonally and with gratitude. Bitter greens for bad bellies after a feast that got enthusiastic. Resin for sealing and for smoke that convinces mosquitoes to set their alarms for another village. A twist of dried flowers that steeped stops a headache from drafting the whole head into its army. You also stock stories because anxiety has a loud voice and short memory. So you tell the one where a young hunter fell into a hole, yelled rude at the hole, spent 2 moons in a sling, and then out threw everyone the following summer, because practice is quieter than boasting. Mainstream fact clears its throat again to remind you why you bother skeletons from deep time, bare-heeled fractures, and long lives after serious injuries, proof that somebody fed, carried, and listened until bones remembered their duty. Not every problem wants hands. Some want patience. Fever takes your measure by hours, sometimes days. You take fever's measure by wet cloths, sips that don't argue on the way down, and the kind of soft talk that leads a mind out of corners. When fear tries to dress up as prophecy, you strip it down to weather and water one more night. Then we reassess another cup. Then we reheat the stones. If your dreams get bossy, call my name, not the dreams. And spoken aloud to the tent itself, we'll take turns so everyone knows the night has signed a contract. You sleep with one ear open and one hand on the pulse of the fire. Both stay honest. Travel shows up as an order you write on your own feet. You lace your sandals with the memory of yesterday's blisters, tighten the ankle wrap so it will forgive the afternoon, and hoist a pack that looks like a net until it learns to ride your shoulders like a domestic idea. The road isn't a line. It's a series of choices crown of the slope, where water fails to gather shade that trades comfort for mosquitoes. Gravel that crunches the way your patience does around noon. You carry coals in a clay pot, because the universe has a sense of humor about rain and damp wood, and because starting from almost fire is a gift you can give your sore hands at day's end. You don't march so much as flow. The band unspools across the landscape in a patient S-curve. Fast walkers learn to slow without announcing they're generous. Shorter legs learn to steady the pace by setting it with the song. Scouts skim the edges and drop back when they've had enough of pretending to be hawks. Mainstream fact smiles at your stride. The human body is an endurance animal built to shed heat through skin and sweat, with springy tendons that bank energy and pay it back good at hours, not minutes. Good at horizons, not sprints. Persistence hunting belongs to certain seasons and certain stories. Most of your days are persistence walking, which is less glamorous and more likely to keep ankles employed. Your pack solves problems before they birth cousins. Water in a gourd lid sealed with wax and hope. Food wrapped in leaf and humor. A roll of hide that becomes shelter or bandage or windbreak, depending on how the sky feels. Small coiled luxuries twine a spare awl, a needle case that fools curiosity by looking boring. You stash a berry-stained pouch for bribes to children and to yourself when the hill invents a second hill. You tie a second, noisier pouch to warn snakes that you aren't a surprise they want to meet. Historians still argue whether big shifts in camp happened mostly for food, for climate, for courtship, for ritual, or for the excellent reason called "we felt like it and nobody owned the view." The truth, you live is a braid of motives, tugged looser or tighter by weather and rumor. Paths have personalities and you greet each properly. The river's edge says watch your ankles and your assumptions. The ridgeline says you'll see far and earn it. The meadow says thank the insects politely. The talus slope says nothing and expects the same, or it will answer back in unhelpful rock. You speak landmarks into your memory in lines that rhyme the notch like a missing tooth. The three pines that refuse to agree on height. The stream that moves like a lazy snake song as breadcrumb trail. Quirky tidbit peeks out from your habits. You drum a little pattern on your thigh at each fork. A private metronome that links beats to choices so later your feet can replay the rhythm and guess the right turn, even when sight goes sulky. Foot care is a religion with no zealots and perfect attendance. You stop early rather than later to move a pebble from annoyance to history. You check the tender place you promised yourself you would, and pack it with moss to keep it from becoming a rumor the whole camp hears. At noon, you let your tools nap in shade because hot hands make poor choices, and you teach the youngest how to hang a gourd so it doesn't spend the afternoon whispering against your hip. Joke 2 waves a fan. At the heat, you announce that today's travel upgrade is left sandal slightly less gravel, and somehow the line earns the group an extra hour of patience. Sometimes travel means distance. Sometimes it means clever. A ravine says no, and you answer with a detour that adds time and removes drama. A sudden squall says prove you're waterproof, and you answer by wearing your humor and your oiled hide. A thorny thicket says don't, and you answer by going around it because scratches are receipts. The future doesn't reimburse. When you find an old hearth stood still in a ring, charcoal grey as a memory, you add 1 new stone and take 1 old ash. A tiny exchange of courtesy with strangers who might be cousins, might be ghosts, might just be you in another month from another direction. You measure progress in little treaties with your body. 3 hills, then a set, 2 songs, then a drink, 1 creak, then sandals off and feet in cold that scolds but forgives. You notice who fades under sun and who brightens under wind. You build pairings that make both better. The strongest shoulders take the heaviest bundle, but only until pride stops helping. Then the bundle rotates because one person's heroism is everyone's fatigue after a few hours. You let children race the last stretch into camp because arriving joyfully is an engineering project too. By late day, the air grows gentle and the light remembers how to be a blessing. You aim for a place that answers yes to 4 quiet questions. Water that isn't opinionated ground, that doesn't puddle its thoughts, wind that leaves sleep alone, and fuel that doesn't make you argue with green wood until midnight. Mainstream fact walks in with armfuls of precedent sites, show repeated use, hearths stacked like coins, napping floors glittered with waste flakes, sleeping spots that reprint on a landscape, because the recipe for good doesn't change much across centuries of feet. You read for those prints like a gossip you trust. When the place says yes, you put your bundles down and let those yeses turn into fire. Evening gathers by degrees, ribboning the world from glare to glow. Fire cracks into being with that small surprised laugh dry wood has, and everybody's day begins to loosen around the blaze like a knot that knows when to be generous. You set a pot where the bubbles will congregate without staging a rebellion, and you hand the child their 2 favorite jobs, stick turner and spark watcher, because responsibility tastes like dessert when measured correctly. Meat at the edge, roots in the middle, a line of flat stones near the coals, doing quiet work on seed cakes that smell like plans. Stories start before anyone asks. Not because the day was dramatic, but because today deserves a translator. The hunt that turned into a walk, that turned into berries, becomes a comedy about persuasive bushes. The blister that almost ruined a mood becomes a morality play about pebbles with ambition. The sighting of a herd far off becomes a decision everyone has already made into tomorrow's wake-up call. Mainstream fact takes a seat and grins bone flutes, and simple drums show up in deep time. The Upper Paleolithic complicates silence with melody and music, stitched to storytelling, is as good at teaching as it is at making. Soup taste more like a ceremony. The elder who keeps the tattered flute cradles it like a chick. Two notes fall into the dark, and the dark admits it likes company. You pull your needle out more from habit than necessity and take 2 stitches in the torn corner of a sling, while your friend tells the old tale of not-so-brave bear who thought shouting was a skill until winter arrived with opinions. Laughter skims around the circle, bounces off hides, hops across the pot, and sets down in the lap of the child finally asleep, with a hand still curled around a stick like a promise. Historians still argue whether the nightly performance around a fire functions mainly as memory vault peacemaking, salon court of law, or love market with better music. Your circle calls it keeping the edges from fraying, and it works. On the far side of the fire, the visitor from the other band shows you a drum no bigger than a hand. The skin thinned, the frame bent with heat and patience, and you trade a little ochre and a straightened spear shaft for the right to borrow its heartbeat tonight. Quirky tidbit leans out of the sparks. Someone drops a pinch of aromatic seeds onto the coals, so the smoke rises with a sweetness that argues successfully against insects and bad dreams. Later, a child will swear the stars smelled like dinner and nobody will correct them because poetry is a cheap luxury that pays high dividends. You eat together the way you work with a preference for fairness that doesn't need a referee. First portions slide toward elders and toward hands that spent the day fixing other people's hours. Second portions circulate as fast as gossip. Third portions don't exist because you have the good sense to declare victory before sleep gets cranky. The pot's last ladleful always finds a bowl you left aside on purpose, the morning bowl, because pre-breakfast. You is a more generous person if someone does the planning for them the night before. Joke 3 arrives, steaming you solemnly toast tomorrow's version of us, and the circle clinks, bone spoons like aristocrats who forgot to be ridiculous. The music after supper belongs to everyone. A bone flute line like river wind, a log tapped with hand and stick, a chorus of breaths pretending to be cranes, a clatter of shells that turns ankles into instruments whenever someone stands up. You don't worry about harmony, you worry about whether the shy teen with the fine ear gets their turn and you contrive a cough at the exact moment that ushers them in. The song that follows isn't perfect. It's camp-shaped, starts strong, meanders into a joke, returns to the path after somebody suggests a better trail, ends when the fire agrees the song has said enough. Before the last embers fold into their red thoughts, you practice the evening's medicine check, feet count. Coughs retie the bandage that loosened while laughter jostled it, set aside a half-gourd of water where a thirsty sleeper can find it without waking the tent into an opera. The ankle you wrapped this morning thanks you with an eye that doesn't pretend. You answer with a promise to re-wrap at dawn and a pat that says you'll be annoying, but fine. Mainstream fact nods that the whole ritual, care routines, feeding, cleaning, keeping warm, keeping safe, do the long unglamorous work of lowering risk, and archaeology measures their success in healed bones and lives that make it to old. The circle thins as the night fattens. Couples step toward shadows that smell like pine. A trio of teens chooses the task of making sure the fire's story never stops, which means learning the craft of coaxing coals into dawn without boasting about it. The visitor curls up near the edge of your shelter and grants you the compliment of audible snoring within minutes. You lie down with your feet turned to the warmth and your face turned to the part of the hide roof where a pinhole of cold starlight keeps insisting on being decorative. You inventory the day in the order the body prefers. Nothing is bleeding. Everything that hurts is supposed to. Tomorrow has a plan. The people you love are close enough to kick by accident. Wind answers the fire's low arithmetic with its own, both counting, both patient. Somewhere a nightbird tells a joke only the dark understands. Somewhere a fox explains fairness to the leftovers. Somewhere the river argues with a rock and loses cheerfully. You tuck your hand under your cheek and find, without trying the rhythm, the band walked together earlier, not the stride, but the fact of many strides choosing the same general direction. That's the medicine you trust most, the travel you keep repeating, the evening you keep earning. Breath softens, fire softens. The world edges closer, not to swallow, but to blanket. And you sleep like someone who has figured out how to ask a hard landscape to be gentle and how to return the favor in the morning. Morning stretches across the camp like warm hide, and you wake into the practical luxury of containers, your quiet superpower, because nothing you harvest or remember lasts long without a place to live. You reach for the gourd you scraped and dried last autumn, palm, finding its familiar waste. A smear of pine pitch still glints along the seam where a crack tried to become a river, and you politely said no. A string of braided plant fiber loops the neck soft from months of sweat and weather, and the stopper is a twist of bark that fits so perfectly you never admit it was luck the first time. Beside it sits a bladder flask rinsed until the water forgave it, now tenderly tough, now watertight in a way your best hopes try to imitate. Baskets lean against the shelter wall in graduating sizes, like a polite family tight-twined for carrying berries that would otherwise defect, open-plied for roots that don't mind a little gossip with the air, and the shallow, handsome one you pretend is only for special occasions, but actually use whenever you want to feel like a person in charge of outcomes. You re-sling the shoulder basket, and it settles where a pocket would be if pockets had been invented. Joke one smiles at your hip. A basket you decide is just a very ambitious pocket with better manners. The camp shares this ambition. Someone is patching a coil basket with a split willow weft. Someone else is boiling a gum of pitch and powdered charcoal that will waterproof a seam and blacken any fidgety fingers that get curious. The child you've been training in twining sits between your knees, one end of nettle cord looped around your big toe, the other end sneaking toward usable length, as little hands learn twist left, twist right, feed the next fiber in so the join hides like a shy lizard. Cordage is patience turned into lines. lines become nets, nets become fish and rabbits pretending to volunteer. You shake out a woven pouch lined in chewed bark, and precious beeswax melted, then rubbed until the weave learned to reject rain and tuck inside the small bright things that travel, needles awls a smooth pebble that makes thin hides forgive creases. Bone needles ride in a hollow bird bone plugged with cork. The case lives in a bag nobody borrows because everyone remembers the winter a whole camp's needles went briefly missing and the universe made its displeasure known. Mainstream fact pads in gently, here actual needles with eyes show up in the upper Paleolithic, some over 30,000 years old. Proof that sewing isn't a brag you invented, but a craft your ancestors framed with bone and sinew long before thread had brand names. You draw one needle, admire the shimmer where many hands have polished it, and slide it back like a promise you're not ready to spend yet. Containers expand your range the way new songs expand your mood. A scoop braided from roots lets you lift embers like a priest lifts candles. A lidded basket keeps dried meat indistinguishable from luck. A tiny net pouch carries the flint nodule that loves you best, separate from the hammerstone that occasionally forgets it's a friend. Quirky tidbit peeks from your toolkit in a tobacco-colored strip, a ribbon of birch bark pitch you chew like gum to soften before you smear it into a seam. A snack for repairs, the only candy your teeth respect. The smell is sharp and old. Later millennia, later people will call birch tar one of the earliest synthetic adhesives, but you already call it that wonderful black that fixes arguments. Walk the shelter line, and you can read every household's priorities by their containers. This one high, narrow baskets for carrying long roots, a fiber net slung like a hammock for tubers that prefer to gossip in bulk. That one bladder flasks lined like shining eggs across a shelf of saplings, each the color of tea, each stoppered with a stick dipped in pitch and rolled in dry clay so tired hands don't fight slickness in the rain. Over there, a tray of shell cups for small things that ought not to live together, fat ochre ground dry herbs, and a rolled-up bark quiver for bone points that resent pockets and will eventually go live inside meat. Historians still argue whether baskets or pottery came first in many places. You vote baskets because the world favors what fire doesn't require, and whether perishable technologies dramatically outpaced the stone and clay that museums remember. The archaeology of baskets is mostly scorched impressions on clay or prints in lucky mud. But the archaeology of your day is a camp that functions because fiber agrees to be strong. Then there's the one clay pot, blackened like an old joke, thick-walled, because nobody here has any interest in delicate when soup is involved. It isn't glossy, it isn't symmetrical. It survived its first firing in the kind of bonfire you build with strategic love, and you cook in it when you can afford to baby it. Mainstream fact steaming from the rim, the very earliest pottery in the world shows up astonishingly early, around 20,000 years ago, at sites in East Asia, coarse, low-fired vessels, likely built for cooking and storage long before anyone invented farming. You run a finger over the soot and feel the grit of sand temper that kept the clay honest, and you plan to mend a hairline crack with slip and hope after dinner. The pot looks fragile and is anything but like most of the camp. Nearby the clothesline that isn't a line at all, but a bent branch and a good plan holds yesterday's rinsed tunics, pieced from soft hide child wrappers like long thoughts, strips of bark cloth beaten to kindness. You pull a tunic down, shake it into sense, and thank a past self for the reinforcement stitches along the shoulders. Every carry day proves that shoulder seams are where ambition goes to rip. You finger the edge of a hood and feel fur left facing in because the wind respects fur direction even when it doesn't respect feelings. Joke 2 glances at your reflection in a scrap of water-smoothed metal. Congratulations, Fashion Week is back, and the judges are ravens. Strut accordingly. Your shelter holds the rest of your carryable life. A frame back of saplings and thong that converts with 4 quick ties from child carrier to basket carrier to pile of everything we own. When the sky decides drama and a folded hide that is floor roof. Cloak, shade, sail, windbreak, privacy, screen, baby nap cue. You inventorize not because you distrust memory, but because memory is a slippery fish gourd bladder basket pot, cordage pitch needle case, ochre fat flint, twined net bark bucket shell cups. Then you add the container most likely to save a day, a clay-lined hearth pot for coals, so you never again have to be the fool who says, "We'll just make fire when we get there," and ends up whispering apologies to damp sticks at midnight. Clothing begins where comfort meets cunning. You run the blunt scraper along the inside of a salted hide until the last stubborn membrane admits defeat. You rub brains and warm water into the fibers because, ridiculous or not, brains do make hide supple, and the hide does not mind the indignity. Smoke finishes the spell, turning softness into weatherproofing and a pleasant faint scent that says camp, even when you're 3 valleys from home. Your all walks a neat procession of holes along a seam line you chalked in red ochre. Sinew follows threaded through the eye of a needle that took a whole afternoon to carve and an entire summer to lose and then triumphantly find again under a sleeping skin. The stitch you favor today bites loops and lies flat. You learned it from a cousin who swears it beats rain by at least 2 drops. When you dress a child, you dress a promise. Fur inward for the baby sling, fur outward for the hood of the hunter who waits a long time in the wind. Fur mixed for the sleeper, for whose job tonight is fire watcher until their eyes forget how. You set grasses inside shoes to wick away the small river feet, invent on cold days. You check the heel of a moccasin where the thong likes to chafe and rub in fat until the leather remembers its responsibilities. Quirky tidbit hums along the seam. Sometimes fish skins become shoes or mitts, scaled, shining, surprisingly tough, once dried and oiled. And no one who hasn't tried it believes until your hands demonstrate how sharp bone bites through that stubborn beauty. A thin strip of gut scraped and dried to transparency finishes as thread finer than sinew and arrogant in the rain. Think of it as your sewing's violin string, happy to hum, happier kept taut. Mainstream fact nods through a lens at your hood. The arrival of clothing as a constant, not a seasonal flirtation, shows up indirectly in the genetics of body lice, whose family tree suggests that tailored garments may have been standard more than 150,000 years ago. That doesn't decide sleeve length, but it does tell you that keeping warm and decent is older than your grandmother's grandmother's songs. Historians still argue whether the very first truly tailored garments arrived with bone needles with clever leather thongs laced through all holes, or with plant fibers twisted beyond rope toward fabric. The answer you live is layered literally and changes with weather and whim. You hang the finished tunic near the door where morning will meet it first, and you turn to the room you wear that isn't clothing shelter as garment shelter as instrument. The cave when you have one is a trustworthy cloak, dry familiar temperature stable, but you don't always have a cave, and landscape has a personality that sometimes says no rooms available. On those days you build. For beach seasons, you love a long, low windbreak of stakes and woven brush hearth on the lee side, sleeping furs stacked so the smallest can sink deepest. For cold valley winters, you raise a domed frame of saplings stitched together with bark and sinew, then thatched with grass, then quilted with hides, until the world calls you a turtle, and you reply smugly, "Warm turtle." Across the fire, a traveler tells you about houses. The river people talk about to the east, bone palaces really ribbed with the great curved bones of mammoths, circular walls stacked from skulls and long bones, hides draped over the frame, until a winter wind changes its mind and looks for trouble elsewhere. Mainstream fact bows at this grandeur at Mezhirish and other Ukrainian sites dated to roughly 15,000 years ago. Circles of mammoth bones outline dwellings, hearths sit within, and debris. Piles whisper long residency, winter headquarters for a logic that knew how to outstare frost. Your mind builds one from the storyteller's hands, ribs arcing jawbones, layered as a wind barrier smoke hole, judicious interior, warm as a secret. Historians still argue whether some of these bone rings were houses, storage and butchery racks, or ritual architecture. You categorize them in the generous drawer labeled solutions that worked. Where the sea hugs a friendly coast, you remember another place you heard of, a memory almost as old as fire, a site of oval shelters staked near a Mediterranean beach, stones weighted around the edges of walls, hearths nested like eggs. Terra Amata is the name someone much later will give it, but you just call it that good plan by the shore. Weather, wind, and later trampling played tricks with the pattern, or people really built those beach houses. The way the stones imply remains a debate among folks who will be born several thousand lifetimes from now. But the logic feels right in your hands. Stake lash, wait warm. You repeat the logic here with your own saplings and your own clever stones, and your camp curls into a circle that remembers you by the smoky shadow it leaves in the dirt when you go. Clothing, shelter, container, 3 parts of the same sentence that ends with survival and sometimes begins with style. You ornament when you can and never apologize. A strip, of dyed sinew braided into a collar, a grid of tiny shells stitched along a hood edge, a fringe of cut hide that dances at a run for the sheer pleasure of announcing your speed to the landscape. Joke 3 flashes like a bead in a seam. You call it functional flair, and if anyone rolls their eyes, you add another bead out of pure principle. Ornament is the travel of meaning across skin and season. Every stitch declares we weren't just cold, we were also us. By midday, the shelter smells like smoked hide, pine pitch, and onion. Someone slid a pot towards the coals when your back was turned, which is the kindest kind of theft. You spread today's sewing across your knees and let your mind wander to the larger garment the group wears. How your circle bulks up with neighbors during good seasons into a costume of 30 people, noisy with trade and singing, then thins to a sleek winter silhouette where every thread is critical. How a new baby rewrites everyone's pattern for a while, and everyone loves the draft. How grief sometimes cuts a hole in the fabric that takes a clever communal patch to disguise and then over time to genuinely repair. You take 2 more stitches knot with the old quick twist and hang the needle high where small hands can't find it and big feet can't step on it because the camp has enough entertainment without emergency embroidery. Afternoon turns into a workshop. You can taste smoke down low clay, a little metallic on the tongue, pitch sweet and dark in the nose. You and your friend wedge clay with heel and knuckle until the last grit disperses and the mass feels loyal. You coil a pot, pinching and smoothing each loop into the one beneath it until the wall's spiral memory blurs into one continuous promise. You press a cord-wrapped stick lightly along the rim, not because cord marking makes the soup smarter, but because it gives your fingers a grip when the pot decides to be slippery with grease. Quirky tidbit nods from your pile of tricks. You dust the outside with fine ash. So when you fire the pot in a bonfire, it will come out with a soft grey surface that forgives fingerprints and gives you the smug pleasure of pretending you planned everything. You build a fire that is not a bonfire so much as a conversation. Small, hot, steady, ringed with shards from pots that failed earlier in their careers and now serve as a sacrificial floor. You lean the new vessels in, feed the flames with patience rather than bravado, and sing a little to keep your breathing even, because pottery prefers potters who don't sprint. Mainstream fact warms its hands nearby. Those earliest East Asian pots, thick, cord-marked, fired in open hearths, were probably made for cooking and for storing soup stock fat. And the invention happened among hunter-gatherers, not farmers, proof that hunger for new containers is a wild appetite, not only a settled one. Your own pot reddens, darkens, and then blackens where the fire licks. The sound changes from dull to delicate when you tap it with a stick. A tiny bell that says, "I lived." While clay works, fiber does not wait. Nets sprawl across knees, their knots marching in tidy grids. Anyone who has ever loved order would find satisfying. A fish weir plan gets drawn in dust, with the finger stakes angled with the current brush, woven tight on the downstream side. A clever little corral that harvests patience rather than drama. Basketry continues in the shade, someone splits a fat root with teeth, and thumbnail, someone else starts a new base, with a cross of 4 spokes and a whisper to the gods of symmetry. The camp pulses like a many-handed loom, every motion catches and passes a thread. Shelter maintenance nudges its way into the schedule because roofs never stop arguing with gravity. You reshape a smoke vent with a stick and a prayer to the fickle spirit of drafts. You add a splash of wet clay to a gap that tried to become a window. You pin a hide panel tighter along the windward side with a bird bone peg that has the courtesy to look handsome while working. The hearth gets raked. Yesterday's ash becomes today's cleaner, good for polishing, good for controlling a too fast fire, good for dusting a greasy hand so it stops trying to escape itself. Historians still argue whether domestic chores like these left enough durable traces to measure their tempo. Ash lenses, micro-debris fields, floor compaction lines, and whether the household existed as a unit in the way later villages define it. But your back votes that the household exists every time the roof fails to, and you are the person other people look at. You pull down a roll of bark you stashed last spring, curling still but pliant, and bend it into a quick bucket by scoring folding and stitching with root. You smear pitch along the seams and let it set, while you eat a handful of parched seeds that crackle like small edible decisions. Containers multiply in a corner until the corner starts to look like a promise of winter comfort. Lidded basket for dried meat, shawl bundle for acorns leached into sweet obedience clay jar for rendered fat that will transform lean stew into something worth remembering kindly. Joke 1 for the late day you proclaim a grand opening for your name's general store and accept payment in stories and shoulder rubs. Some economies are older and more reliable than coins. Clothing repairs slip in between tasks like a clever thief. You tighten a thong here, restitch a gusset, there add a small triangle under an arm where movement asked for more space than pattern allowed. You reinforce knee patches because knees believe in adventures more than cloth does. A neighbor shows off a hood trimmed with tiny shells that make a small rain sound when she turns her head. You genuinely admire and then copy the trick shamelessly in your head for next season when you find enough shells to justify the music. Mainstream fact sidles in with a wink, textile impressions in ancient clay twined or woven hint that plant fiber clothing and bags existed even when the fibers themselves vanished, and a few rare fragments of twisted plant fibers push glimmers of string technology far back into deep time. You honor that long tradition by teaching a child the 2-strand twist that makes cordage sing. Their first lumpy chord is ugly and perfect. As dusk pulls a soft lid over the workshop, you check the pots. One cracked as some will. You shrug and see a future in it, grind it into grog for stronger clay next time, or turn the base into a shallow pan for roasting seeds. The others survived their skins smoky and handsome, their mouths promising soups that will forgive the weather's tantrums. You carry them like babies the first day because file marks are forever. You tuck them where sleep won't roll onto them. You teach the camp with a mock-stern voice. New pots don't bounce, and everyone laughs because someone dropped one last spring, and the memory has matured into a safe joke. Before sleep, you walk the camp with the eye you reserve for tomorrow. Shelter edges tied, drying rack loaded, coals banked under a humble hut of ash, water gourd hung high where paws can't negotiate rope, needles counted and put to bed in their bird-bone house, pitch sealed, cordage coiled, baskets turned on their sides so the dew runs off like an argument you don't want to have at breakfast. Historians still argue whether objects like these pots, baskets, clothing houses are technologies or members of the family. Your answer is uncomplicated. You thank each in your head the way you thank the people. Because tonight, the difference between a lidded jar and a neighbor is narrower than grammar admits. You settle into your hide with the loaf of new knowledge, cooling the way bread does, quietly singing to itself. And you think about how containers changed, not just what you carry, but who you can be a person with. Leftovers, a person who can save a flavor for tomorrow, a person whose tools don't wander in the night because you gave them a den. Joke 2 yawns at the door. You declare tomorrow's fashion theme layers, layer of hide, layer of bark, layer of smoke, layer of pride, and predict rave reviews from your core audience of owls. The fire listens, approves, and tucks the camp in with orange hands. Last glance at the pots, last finger along the seam of a hood, last tug on the door flap that proves it will argue in your favor if wind arrives with opinions. The night is a container too, and you climb into it with the confidence of someone who spent the day giving everything its place. A soft clink as a shell fringe settles a soft thup, as a cork finds home in a gourd. A softer sigh as your ribs remember they're allowed to widen. Tomorrow will want movement. Tonight wants nothing dramatic, only the quiet inventory of enough baskets, enough stitches, enough walls between your sleeping and the weather's whims. The kettle in your chest cools to the pleasant warmth of a kept promise. The ground accepts your weight and gives it back as steadiness. The horizon takes your last leftover attention and keeps it safe till morning. Nothing insists. Everything waits. You drift the way smoke remembers. It was air the way a story remembers it can be silence. The way a long road remembers it is only many small steps put kindly in a row. Sleep well. Wake easy. The fire will be ready. So will you.